Chapter 318. It was easy for children to forget some unhappy things, but this didn't mean that they wouldn't think about it again in the future. If one day they suddenly associated these unhappy things, they might be inexplicably unhappy or even sad. These behaviors may be somewhat incomprehensible in the eyes of adults, so there were often situations where the children were crying while the parents were confused. "What's wrong with the baby? You were playing just now, why are you suddenly crying? Did someone bully you? Do you want to buy something?" In fact, the child was just reminded of the past. After all, they were still young and hadn't learned how to control their emotions. Even adults would become very sad when thinking about sad things, let alone children. Only when they grew up would they truly learn to be strong. Under the comfort of Qin Ruing, the little girl quickly stopped crying. However, this also reminded Xianxia that he must prepare a birthday gift in half a month. After forgetting those troubles, the little girl's face was full of smiles again. Xianxia used WeChat to video call Gu Lao. After a few simple polite words, the two sides of the call became the three little guys. Nian was waving her small hands vigorously on this side, while the twins were pushing and squeezing on the other side, all scrambling to talk to her. When Xianxia saw this situation, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but reveal a smile. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, but the friendship between these three little things hadn't faded in the slightest. After they each told their own happy experiences during this period of time, the brothers made an appointment with Nian to meet at the tea house tomorrow, saying that they had a gift for her. Hearing that the brothers had a gift for her, the little girl's mood was obviously much better. Therefore, after hanging up the phone, she happily rode the big cat in the courtyard. The big cat was wearing a saddle, like a black horse galloping back and forth in the courtyard. Nian turned into an excellent rider, holding the reins in one hand and patting the big cat's butt with the other, constantly shouting, "Giddy up, giddy up, giddy up." Accompanied by her bell-like laughter, this courtyard that had been silent for a period of time seemed to have regained its vigor and vitality. Night fell. Above the vast Pacific Ocean, a figure slowly flew over. Then, the figure plunged into the sea like a falling meteorite. This was a deep-sea area with a depth of more than 3,000 meters. Xianxia plunged straight into the seabed like a sharp sword. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of a cave at the bottom of the sea. Because of the turbulent current entering and exiting the cave, every time the tide rose, a whirlpool would appear at the cave entrance, sucking in everything around it. When the tide receded, the hole would spew out the things that were previously swallowed, so no creature was willing to settle down here. Such a natural deep-sea cave was definitely a place that explorers would dream of. But it was a pity. The hole was very small, almost the size of an elevator door. It was impossible for a large deep-sea submarine to enter. Xianxia used his qi to protect his body and quickly swam through the depths of the cave like a sailfish. The cave was very deep and complicated. There were many passages connected. Each passage went left and right, and connected to small caves one after another. It was like a spider web maze, and there was no telling where the end was. There was no light in the cave, so Xianxia lit up a light ball. Where the light reached, all kinds of underwater plants immediately reflected colorful light. Like a flexible fish swimming through the cave, after about 2 or 3 minutes, Xianxia came to the end of the cave. Then he directly floated to the surface of the water. This place, it turned out to be a waterless cave. It was like an inverted cup in a basin. Because there was air in the cave, the seawater could not rush in. This was common knowledge in physics that even elementary school students knew, but it was impossible to find such a place in reality. Unless, the walls of the cave were specially processed to withstand the pressure and erosion of the seawater, to ensure that the air in the cave would not leak, and to maintain a stable air pressure, thus resisting the pressure of the seawater. Obviously, this cave had been modified by Xianxia, otherwise, it was impossible for the seawater not to rush in. The cave was about 40 to 50 meters deep, 10 meters wide, and 7 to 8 meters high. The end of the pool was slightly narrower, looking like an egg. Xianxia pushed the light ball in his hand into the air, and the strong light suddenly illuminated the entire cave. In the cave, there were people. Xianxia looked up and saw 2 people floating in the air with their arms and legs spread out. They looked like Jesus on the cross. So, have you thought about it? Xianxia slowly walked into the depths of the cave. As he walked, he said this to the two of them. Xianxia's voice was not loud, but after his voice fell, the cave kept echoing for a long time. Cough! After hearing Xianxia's words, one of them immediately twitched a few times. However, he was firmly bound in the air by an invisible force, so he could only barely shake his head. Cough, cough. This person coughed heavily a few times, then slowly raised his head. His hair was messy, and his long hair covered half of his face, but it still did not cover his eyes that were filled with hatred. This person, it was actually Bai Hong. Bai Hong raised his head with great difficulty, and after looking deeply at Xianxia, he said with a hoarse voice, "A soldier can be killed, but not humiliated. If you have the ability, just kill me." At this moment, Bai Hong looked very weak, like a prisoner who had not eaten for many days. If one looked closely, one could see that his body was full of thin golden needles, and he looked like a hedgehog. And this was obviously Xianxia's masterpiece. After Xianxia defeated the three people, he did not directly kill them, but used a secret technique to imprison them here. The densely packed golden needles on Bai Hong's body were the legendary spirit needles and spirit-piercing needles. As long as one was hit by these needles, the immortal cultivator would not be able to make the Yuanying come out of the body, and the soul would be completely imprisoned in the body. "I don't have the ability." After hearing Bai Hong's words, Xianxia smiled and waved at him, then went to the ice block that Xiang had turned into and looked carefully. After confirming that Xiang would not wake up in a short time, Xianxia turned to Bai Hong and continued, "Do you know why I didn't kill you?" Bai Hong did not reply. Seeing this, Xianxia smiled lightly and continued, "The reason why I didn't kill you is because I don't want to kill indiscriminately. I just wanted to ask you a few simple questions, but you didn't cooperate at all. Could it be?" Chapter 319. Bai Hong lowered his head and didn't speak, but the anger in his eyes never extinguished. With his current appearance, he looked a bit like a loyal minister who was wrongly imprisoned in ancient times. At this moment, he was being hung on the city wall by the traitor Xianxia as a warning to others. Xianxia stood on the ground and looked at Bai Hong silently. After waiting for a long time and not waiting for Bai Hong's reply, Xianxia couldn't help but sneer and said again, "I don't know if you have a secret method called soul snatching?" Speaking of this, Xianxia deliberately paused. After taking a deep look at Bai Hong, he chuckled and said, "This secret method has the miraculous effect of exploring other people's memories. The conditions for using it are very simple as long as the other party loses the ability to resist. However, although this secret method is good, it has a great flaw, that is, it will bring some sequelae to the person who is to be used. Well, a light case of Qigong deviation, a heavy case of the soul dispersing. There are 3 people here, so who do you think is more suitable to use this secret method on?" Xianxia's voice sounded like it came from the 9 serenities, giving people a gloomy feeling. And the moment Bai Hong heard the words, soul snatching, his body couldn't help but tremble violently. Not because of fear, but because of anger. Despicable! After squeezing out such a word from the gap of his teeth, Bai Hong raised his head and growled word by word, "Let me tell you, if I ever get away, I will definitely cut you into pieces." "Very good, very good." Xianxia chuckled a few times, and after pretending to clap twice, he didn't talk nonsense, but directly took out the soul crystal from his arms. His divine soul injury had not healed yet. Bai Hong and the others were in a high realm, so for safety reasons, Xianxia naturally needed the help of the soul crystal when using this secret method of soul searching. However, the moment Xianxia took out the soul crystal, Bai Hong's face suddenly changed, and he asked anxiously, "Why do you have Gui Yao's mysterious crystal?" "Gui Yao? Black crystal?" After glancing at the soul crystal in his hand in puzzlement, Xianxia asked thoughtfully, "Since you recognize this thing, why don't we have a good chat?" Bai Hong seemed to want to know where Xianxia got this soul crystal from. After a moment of hesitation, he asked, "This mysterious crystal? Where did you get it?" "The Xianxia Glacier, yes, a place 5,000 meters above sea level." Bai Hong didn't know where the Xianxia Glacier was, nor did she understand what Xianxia meant by the altitude. Left with no choice, Xianxia could only ponder for a while before asking, Karakoram, do you know this place? Kunlun. The moment she heard this term, Bai Hong's eyes couldn't help but widen. It was obvious that he knew about Kunlun. Xianxia noticed this detail, so he wisely shut his mouth and kept looking at Bai Hong. The expression on Bai Hong's face was a little uncertain. He knew what Xianxia meant, so after hesitating for a while, he let out a deep breath and said hatefully, Fine, what you want to know isn't some secret that can't be told, it's not a big deal to tell you. Later, in Bai Hong's slow narration, Xianxia finally learned some secrets about the ancient times. A long time ago, the earth was indeed a cultivation holy land similar to the Tianxian domain, so many cultivation inheritances were born. But one day, the spirit of heaven and earth on the earth began to weaken and dry up for no reason. If the spirit of heaven and earth was compared to a water source, then the cultivators were the fish in the water. Once the water source was lost, the fish would naturally go extinct. The cultivators on the earth obviously couldn't sit still and wait for death. Therefore, leaving the earth to find a place to cultivate became the common goal of everyone. The universe was vast and boundless. It was full of opportunities and hidden dangers. There was definitely more than one cultivation holy land. If one wanted to go from one cultivation holy land to another, not to mention whether there was a map navigation, even if there was a map navigation, could one really get there smoothly? Xianxia was able to smoothly return to the earth from the Tianxian domain. The hardships he had to go through were not something ordinary people could bear. Moreover, to fly across galaxies, one would need to be at least at the soul formation stage. How many soul formation stage cultivators could there be on Earth? This was related to the problem of whether the cultivation inheritances on Earth could continue to be passed down. Therefore, the cultivators of the ancient times put aside their prejudices and united to find a way to pass down their inheritances. Heaven would not let down those who worked hard. Under the leadership of the most powerful cultivator of the ancient times, the Tai Ching sacred master, the ancient cultivators finally found a way to survive, and that was a great world that existed in the void. A great world was similar to a small grotto heaven. If explained from a modern scientific point of view, it was somewhat similar to the concept of a dimensional space. If the universe Xianxia was in was compared to a bedroom, then the great world was the closet in the bedroom. It was closely connected to the universe, but it was a closed space of its own. And this was the so-called Great World. The only difference between a great world and a small grotto heaven was that the former was naturally formed and existed in the space cracks of the vast universe, while the latter could be opened manually. Of course, the scale, size, and stability of the two could not be compared. The Great World was discovered by the Tai Ching sacred master when he was looking for a cultivation holy land in the universe. After he brought the news back to Earth, he united all the cultivators on Earth and gathered everyone's strength to open a passage directly from Earth to the Great World in the void. And this passage was also called by the later generations, the Gate of Heaven. This information seemed very important to Xianxia, but it was a historical event that everyone in the Great World knew. Therefore, Bai Hong had no intention of hiding it at all. Soon, she told Xianxia about the origin of the Gate of Heaven. This was also the information that Xianxia wanted to know the most. Therefore, after Bai Hong finished speaking, she looked at Xianxia, ready to listen to him talk about the origin of the soul crystal. Without any discussion, the two of them reached a tacit agreement. This was a very good start. Therefore, Xianxia told Bai Hong about the origin of the soul crystal and the Temple of Time in detail. He deliberately spoke in detail, paying attention to the changes in Bai Hong's expression during the process. When Xianxia said that he had destroyed the soul of the Azure Dragon in the Great Hall, he keenly noticed that Bai Hong's pupils suddenly contracted. There was something fishy. Xianxia looked deeply at Bai Hong. After telling the story about the soul crystal, it was his turn to ask again. Chapter 320. What was the sundial? Xianxia raised his question, but Bai Hong did not answer immediately. He looked at the soul crystal in Xianxia's hand and was silent for a long time before he answered slowly. Back then, after the Tai Ching sacred master led everyone to the Great World, he left 5 sacred temples in the lower realm. One of them was the sundial. Although the great world was self-contained, it was still a spatial crack in the depths of the void. It was just that this crack was larger and more stable than an ordinary small grotto heaven. But it was a pity. Although the great world was good, it was far from being as stable as the main world. It might suddenly close one day and imprison the ancient cultivators in the void forever. Therefore, the Tai Ching sacred master left 5 sacred temples on earth. These 5 sacred temples used the soul crystal as the core to suppress 5 ancient ferocious beasts and use their powerful souls as the coordinates to communicate between the 2 realms. As long as the souls of the ferocious beasts in the 5 sacred temples were not destroyed, even if the spatial cracks suddenly closed and trapped the ancient cultivators in the void, they could still find the main world through the souls of these 5 ferocious beasts and forcefully open a passage back to the main world. The remnant soul of the azure dragon that Xianxia had encountered before was an ancient ferocious beast suppressed by the sundial temple. Because of the nourishment of the soul crystal, the azure dragon's soul had not dissipated after so many years. The azure dragon was an ancient ferocious beast. In terms of intelligence, it was not inferior to the ancient cultivators. But it was also because it was an intelligent creature that the moment Xianxia opened the seal, the azure dragon attacked Xianxia crazily and tried to occupy his body. After all, it had been imprisoned for a very long time and its desire for freedom had long been ingrained in its bones. Now that it finally saw the hope of escape, it naturally would not let it go. But the azure dragon never expected that what it had waited for with great difficulty was not freedom, but the tragic fate of having its soul destroyed. The sundial temple was like a signal tower connecting the 2 realms. Once the azure dragon's remnant soul was destroyed, the ancient cultivators in the great world naturally could no longer sense the existence of the sundial temple. Therefore, they sent Bai Hong and the others to investigate the situation and also to see where Changli had gone and why he had not returned. At the mention of Changli, Bai Hong immediately frowned deeply. Gui Yao was destroyed, Changli's fate was unknown, and now even the 3 of them had fallen into the hands of this person, completely reduced to prisoners. Everything was the work of this mysterious man in front of him. When did such an expert appear in the lower realm? Thinking of this, Bai Hong couldn't help but take a deep look at Xianxia before asking her second question. Who are you? His question was very general, so Xianxia immediately replied with a smile. Me? My name is Xianxia. I'm from Zhonghai and I'm currently living in Shangjing. I'm unemployed and I own a tea house. I spend most of my time at home with my wife and kids. Bai Hong wasn't a fool. This perfunctory answer naturally wouldn't satisfy him. Therefore, he immediately interrupted Xianxia and said angrily, "Don't try to trick me. With the cultivation conditions of the lower realms, it's impossible for an existence of your level to appear. Who are you? Why do you want to be our enemy?" Bai Hong seemed to be very concerned about this question. Seeing this, Xianxia spread out his hands innocently and replied seriously, "Why would I lie to you? I'm really a native of Earth." "Yes, Earth is the lower realm you mentioned. I've always been in the lower realm, so I don't know anything about your world. Otherwise, why would I waste my time asking you these simple questions?" These words were reasonable and for a moment, Bai Hong didn't know how to continue asking. Yes, if Xianxia also came from the lower realm, then why didn't he know the history that everyone knew? Bai Hong secretly tried to figure out Xianxia's background. Xianxia waited for a while. Seeing that Bai Hong didn't speak, he asked with a smile, "Okay, now it's my turn to ask questions?" Bai Hong didn't answer. Seeing this, Xianxia continued asking, "Let's talk about the lower realm. I'm very curious about the situation inside." As he spoke, he gently rubbed the soul crystal in his hand with his finger. This action seemed to be a silent warning to Bai Hong that if he still didn't speak, he would use force. In fact, the reason why Xianxia took the trouble to ask and didn't directly use the secret technique to search his soul was mainly because his soul injury had not healed. After all, Bai Hong and the others were not weak and their souls were intact. If they also happened to practice some kind of secret technique that strengthened their souls, then Xianxia would very likely suffer a backlash in the process of casting the technique and go crazy. Xianxia now had the upper hand and had plenty of ways to make Bai Hong talk. Naturally, he wouldn't take the risk so easily. It was better to be safe than sorry. Xianxia had a deep understanding of this. Looking at the glimmering light on the soul crystal, an indescribable feeling suddenly appeared in Bai Hong's eyes. After exhaling deeply, he looked at Xianxia and slowly said, "The lower realm? That's a place that's close to paradise." The lower realm was located in a void crack in the depths of the universe and was connected to Earth through the gate of heaven. Therefore, even if Earth's spirit chi was exhausted, the lower realm still had rich spirit chi of heaven and earth. As the ancient cultivators came to the lower realm one after another, the grand pure divine ancestors' fame and prestige reached its peak. If one wanted to make an enemy of the grand pure divine ancestor, they had to be mentally prepared to make an enemy of the entire lower realm. Therefore, the Grand Pure One relied on his supreme power to turn the tide and support the building that was about to collapse to successfully do something that no one before him had ever done before, and that was, he combined the originally scattered and independent cultivator legacies and successfully created an organization called Celestial Capital in the lower realm. The appearance of Celestial Capital was like Qin Shi Huang sweeping through the 6 nations and unifying the world. Under the intentional push of the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, the various sects and clans put down their prejudices and learned from each other. They learned from each other and learned from each other. Everyone obtained the benefits they wanted, and Tiandu ushered in its most glorious moment. But it was a pity that this glory didn't last forever. The path to immortality was difficult as ascending to the blue sky. Even a stunning and unparalleled existence like the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor was unable to break free from the shackles of the heavenly Tao in the end. As a result, his lifespan ran out and he passed away with regret. With the passing of the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, Celestial Capital's strength also weakened rapidly and was no longer as glorious as before. However, as the saying goes, a dead camel is bigger than a horse, and a rotten ship still has 3 caddies of iron. Although Celestial Capital was no longer as glorious as before, with the assets left behind by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, Celestial Capital was still the strongest force in the lower realm. As the Divine General of Celestial Capital, Bai Hong naturally could not tell Xianxia all the details of Celestial Capital, so after a brief introduction of the origin of Celestial Capital, he closed his mouth again. In this regard, Xianxia had no intention of continuing to ask, because he had roughly guessed the current situation of Celestial Capital. The reason was very simple: the world was as black as the crows. In order to survive, cultivators had to strengthen themselves through plundering. If the immortal cultivators were regarded as animals, then from the perspective of such a selfish ethnic style, to create a country or organization with a centralized system similar to that of Heavenly Capital, that was simply an impossible thing. After all, as consumers at the top of the food chain, cultivators could strengthen the overall strength of the clan after forming an organization, but they did not have enough resources to maintain the operation of the organization. It was precisely because of this that cultivators had always established relationships with each other in the form of clans and sects, and could only huddle together in a small area for warmth. In the end, it was all because of those simple 8 words: natural selection, survival of the fittest. Chapter 321. The Great World. Tiandu. The Tai Ching Sacred Leader. Although Bai Hong deliberately concealed a lot of important information, it didn't stop Xianxia from making a reasonable analysis. Thus, when he connected all the information he already knew together, a clear picture suddenly appeared in his mind. First of all, he could confirm that Earth was originally a cultivation holy land similar to Tianxian. However, on a certain day a long time ago, Earth's spirit chi suddenly declined. In order to survive, the ancient cultivators entered the great world under the lead of the Tai Ching Sacred Leader. The so-called Heavenly Gate was actually a passage connecting the 2 realms. The Tai Ching Sacred Leader gathered everyone's strength to open the Heavenly Gate to the great world. Then he left 5 sacred temples on Earth to maintain the connection between the 2 realms. Although the ancient cultivators had left, they had left behind some incomplete inheritances on Earth. Thus, The ordinary people left on Earth evolved all kinds of cultivation methods based on these legacies, such as necromancers, martial artists, yin-yang masters, and so on. However, it was a pity that the cultivation environment on Earth was so bad, and because the legacies were incomplete, the celestial realm became the limit that the cultivators on Earth could reach. At this time, the group of celestials trapped on Earth naturally began to think of ways to continue to break through, just like their ancestors had done. Later on, they should have found a way to communicate with the great world, so there were many legends about the heavenly gate in this world. Once the heavenly gate was opened, one could ascend. However, they didn't know that the opening of the heavenly gate was not controlled by the ancient cultivators. The Tai Ching's sacred leader gathered everyone's strength to forcibly open a passage to the great world. Why would he open it again for one or two celestial realm juniors? The reason why the heavenly gate was so difficult to open was mainly because the spirit chi of the two realms was too different. Here was an example. If the great world was a sealed pressure cooker, then the heavenly gate was the lid. Because the spirit chi in the great world was much denser than on Earth, there was a strong pressure difference between the two sides of the heavenly gate. In the face of such a strong pressure, if one wanted to open the lid with violence, it would be equivalent to bearing the impact of the entire great world's spirit chi alone. In this situation, not to mention insightful emptiness, even an immortal emperor would find it difficult. Since it was impossible to open it by force, some ingenious methods were needed. A portion of the gas was discharged through the vent to reduce the pressure in the pressure cooker. When the pressure inside the cooker was about the same as the pressure outside, the lid could be opened easily. However, the great world was not a pressure cooker, and there was no vent on the divine gate, so they could only use the second method. That was, by increasing the air pressure in the outside world, the air pressure between the two worlds would be the same. Then, it would be easy to open the lid. It sounded simple, but in practice, it was exceptionally difficult. After all, if the spiritual chi on Earth could reach the level of the great world, why would the ancient cultivators leave their homes and hide in the great world? Therefore, every time the divine gate opened, it was actually the time when the spirit chi on Earth began to recover. Thinking of this, Xianxia finally understood the role of Xiannu. The great world used the spiritual souls of the ancient ferocious beasts to locate Earth. Similarly, the cultivators on Earth had to use the same method to locate the great world. With the depletion of spiritual chi, there were no more ancient ferocious beasts on Earth. Therefore, they could only settle for the next best thing, which was to use Xiannu's yin soul to maintain the connection between the two worlds. No one knew when the divine gate would open, so generations of Xiannus had been replaced, until the generation of Qin Ruoying and Qin Xueqing Xiannu. At the thought of this, Xianxi's eyes instantly became much sharper. After all, this was an important issue related to Yingying's spiritual soul. He had already found Yingying's yin soul and taken care of those old bastards in the village. There shouldn't be any more problems, right? Xianxia thought seriously for a long time. In the end, he still felt a little uneasy, so he asked again, "By the way, do you know what Xiannu does?" Xiannu? Xiannu was not a product of the great world. Bai Hong had nothing to hide about this, so she asked straightforwardly, "You mean Siming Xiannu?" Siming Xiannu? After Xianxia repeated this name, he replied hesitantly, "I think so. Other than Siming Xiannu, I haven't heard of a similar name. If you want to ask about Siming Xiannu, then I'm sorry, I don't know much about it." This answer obviously did not satisfy Xianxia, so he immediately frowned and asked, "Why? You came from the great world. Don't you need Xiannu to sense the location of Earth?" We have the Sun Glory Temple. Why do we need Siming Xiannu?" After hearing Bai Hong's matter-of-fact answer, Xianxia was stunned. That's right. Since the ancient immortal cultivators in the great world used the souls of ancient fierce beasts to maintain the coordinates of the two worlds, why did they need Xiannu's soul to guide them? Xianxia stared at Bai Hong for a long time. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something. His figure flashed, and he appeared in front of Bai Hong out of thin air. Since Siming Xiannu and the Sun Glory Temple have the same function, that means the former is just a substitute for the latter. You just said that the Sunglory Temple has been controlled by Tiandu since ancient times. Even if I accidentally destroyed the Sunglory Temple, there should be 4 temples left that have the same function. So, I want to ask you to tell me, Siming Xian Nu, and who is in control of it? Xianxia floated in the air, at most 2 meters away from Bai Hong. He just looked at Bai Hong quietly, and Bai Hong also saw a dignified feeling in his eyes. Xianxia was not stupid. The reason why this seemingly contradictory question appeared now was obviously because Bai Hong concealed some information that might involve Siming Xian Nu towards Tiandu, and even the entire Great World. Xianxia had a curious attitude, so she did not delve into how much truth or falsehood Bai Hong's words had. However, when these questions began to involve Qin Ring, Xianxia naturally had to change his way of communicating with Bai Hong. Although Bai Hong and Xianxia had not met many times, it was the first time he saw Xianxia so dignified, so he very wisely shut his mouth and was ready to answer after thinking about it. Because he also knew that if he continued to be perfunctory, the two of them might not be able to chat so happily anymore. Think carefully before answering. Xianxia gave Bai Hong enough time to think. So, after a moment of silence, Bai Hong slowly said 2 words. Chapter 322. Attention to all bosses, a bug has appeared. The previous chapter has been modified, Chapter 321, the correct way to open the divine gate. Please review it. Please forgive us if we have caused you any inconvenience. Sorry, Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu. The truth was just as Xianxia thought. Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu was indeed the guide for cultivators to ascend to the great world. Through a secret technique, the elders placed Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu's earthly soul into the soul mirror, thereby establishing a connection with the great world. There were 2 sides to the soul mirror. One was in celestial capital, and the other was on earth. Just like a wired telephone, Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu's earthly soul was the most important telephone line. However, Xian Nu herself was only immortal. Therefore, when they became Xian Nu, their earthly souls had to be at their most stable and strong. That is, between 10 and 30 years old. Just like an old saying, a person will pass noon after 30 days. Once a person's age exceeded 30, their body's various functions would gradually decline, and they would go downhill. The so-called Arbiter of Fate was the mandate of the heavens. According to the village's tradition, becoming Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu was a very glorious and fortunate thing. However, only the elders knew, even after Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu left office, the earthly soul would not be returned to them. The moment they became Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu, they were destined to have 1 less soul than ordinary people. If one of the 3 souls was missing, they could not be considered a complete person. Therefore, every time Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu left office, their bodies would suddenly become very weak, as if they had leukemia. They would be weak all over and fall sick easily. In addition, the effects of the soul recovery soup would gradually weaken, and the consequences of losing one of the 3 souls would gradually become apparent. Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu usually did not live past 35 years old. It was also because of this that Qin Ruing's mother died young. Of course, Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu's function was obviously not limited to this. Through Bai Hong's explanation, Xianxia was surprised to learn that the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu had another use, and that was, cultivators in the great world could use the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu to check the condition of Earth's spiritual energy and selectively open the heavenly gates. Other than that, even Bai Hong wasn't sure if Siming Xian Nu had any other secrets. As a result, after telling Xianxia everything he knew, he said calmly, "That's all I know. If you still don't believe me, you can search my soul." Bai Hong's temperament was originally cold and arrogant. Now that she had become Xianxia's prisoner and had unwillingly confessed some things under his interrogation, she naturally felt very uncomfortable in her heart. What's more, even if he told the truth, Xianxia still had a suspicious look on his face. Bai Hong was naturally unwilling to say anything more. It was merely a soul-searching. What did he have to fear? Seeing this, Xianxia didn't force her anymore. After seriously considering the truth of Bai Hong's words, Xianxia turned and flew back to the ground. It's getting late. Let's call it a day. After landing, Xianxia waved at Bai Hong without looking back, then walked straight out of the cave. Anyway, there were still many days ahead. He had plenty of time to slowly chat with Bai Hong. However, just as Xianxia was about to step into the pool, Bai Hong suddenly called out to him. "Wait!" Her voice was very weak. However, Xianxia's ears were very sharp. He immediately stopped in his tracks and turned around to look at her. Is there anything else?" Xianxia waited for a while, but Bai Hong didn't say anything. For a moment, the deep cave was so quiet that not even the sound of breathing could be heard. After an unknown amount of time, Bai Hong's voice slowly rang out from the darkness. "If we calculate according to the time in the lower realm, the divine gate will open again in a month at most, including Changli, for divine generals of Tiandu have already fallen in your hands, so it's impossible to ignore it like before. If you let us go now, I can promise to let bygones be bygones and pretend that these things never happened. Otherwise, what you will face might be even more terrifying than you think." Hearing this, Xianxia's lips suddenly curved into a slight smile. However, he didn't say anything harsh. As if he was saying goodbye to an old friend of many years, he waved casually at Bai Hong and jumped directly into the pool. They were all adults. Didn't they know what was right and what was wrong? If they didn't have some skills, would Xianxia deal with them like this? Naive. It was getting late, so after Xianxia left the cave, he prepared to go to the Xianxia Glacier to pick up Yingying from the Sundial Brilliance Temple. But when he traveled on the seabed for a while and was about to fly to the shallow sea area, he suddenly sensed a faint fluctuation of spiritual energy around him. Out of caution, Xianxia followed this fluctuation of spiritual energy and carefully searched the seabed. This was the deep sea where even the sun couldn't shine. Being in it gave people a feeling of being in the universe. Xianxia lit up a light ball. Suddenly, a colorful fantasy world appeared in front of him. Fish of all shapes and colors moved freely on the seabed. In addition to fish, there were all kinds of shellfish, starfish, corals, and seaweed dancing in the waves. Faced with this dreamlike underwater world, the first reaction in Xianxia's mind was, Nian should also like this place, right? Why not take advantage of her birthday and take her on a day trip under the sea? She seriously considered the feasibility of this idea. At the same time, he quickly came to the place where there was a fluctuation of spiritual energy. This was a seabed gully about 100 meters wide, like a natural moat in front of him. Seeing this, Xianxia didn't hesitate and went straight into the trench. The two sides of the trench were as steep as cliffs, so as soon as he entered the trench, it was as if he fell off a cliff. The trench was not deep, about 20 to 30 meters. The bottom of the trench was full of colorful coral reefs, and schools of fish were swimming back and forth around the coral. In addition, there were all kinds of strange crustaceans, such as shrimps and crabs. Xianxia didn't even know which species they belonged to. Xianxia simply patrolled around and didn't find anything strange, but that trace of spiritual energy didn't disappear from the beginning to the end. The reason why Xianxia was so interested in this spiritual energy was that this spiritual energy was not the original spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Instead, it seemed to have been roughly processed, somewhat similar to the existence of true essence. Of course, this spiritual energy was far from being as pure as true essence. The spiritual energy was too scattered, and he couldn't find the specific location, so after Xianxia patrolled again, he was ready to leave. But just as he was about to leave, he inadvertently saw a fish hiding in the coral reefs. Separated by dozens of meters, Xianxia and the fish looked at each other from a distance. At that moment, Xianxia saw a trace of fear in its eyes. This fish was actually like a human, and it could actually use its eyes to express its emotions. Xianxia raised his eyebrows and almost instantly understood why. This guy, surprisingly, it was also a monster that had gained intelligence. Thinking of this, Xianxia was ready to catch this fish and study it. But before he could do anything, the fish seemed to have realized something. Like a cat whose tail was stepped on, it immediately drilled into the nearby coral reefs. Its speed was very fast. If it wasn't for Xianxia's eyesight that was far better than ordinary people, he would have thought that he was seeing things interesting. Chapter 323. A fish that had awakened its intelligence. Obviously, this fish was like the big cat. Because it encountered some kind of opportunity, it opened its own path of cultivation. However, the big cat's original form was a leopard. Leopards were at the top of the food chain. Therefore, before they gained intelligence, the big cat's chances of survival were naturally much higher than the fish in front of him. It was just a small fish, not a shark or a whale. Could it overturn rivers and seas? Fish were like rabbits, weak and timid. Even the slightest movement could frighten them, not to mention that this was a fish with intelligence comparable to that of a human. Therefore, when the fish realized that Xianxia had found it, it quickly drilled into the coral reef, wanting to hide as far away from this human as possible. But regrettably, the person it encountered today was not those diving enthusiasts who wore swimsuits and carried oxygen tanks, but immortal cultivators who protected their bodies with vital energy. Even if they were in the water, they were like birds soaring in the sky. The coral reef in front of him was very lush. It was as difficult as looking for a needle in a haystack to find this living fish. But fortunately, Xianxia was no longer the same as before. After this period of recovery, his soul injury had recovered a little, and the range of his divine sense had naturally increased a lot. Therefore, Xianxia, with the help of the soul crystal, allowed his divine sense to cover more than half of the trench in an instant. Wherever his divine sense went, even if it was a drop in the ocean, Xianxia could see it all. Then, Xianxia found the fish in the deepest part of the coral reef. At this time, he finally saw the fish's appearance. This was a typical deep-sea fish, so its appearance was very different from river fish and shallow sea fish. Because it lived in the dark seabed all year round, the characteristics of deep-sea fish were usually a big mouth, big eyes, and a certain part of its body had a light-emitting device. Through the light-emitting device, they could emit light to lure prey and at the same time, attract mates and reproduce. Most of the deep-sea fish had strange shapes, and Xianxia had not deliberately studied the species of deep-sea fish. But when he saw the fish's appearance clearly, the name of this fish appeared in his mind in an instant, and that was anglerfish. The name sounded complicated, but in fact, it referred to the kind of fish with a lantern on its head. It was also because of the lantern on its head that this fish was often called the anglerfish. There were many species of anglerfish, most of which were very ugly and even a little scary. But the one in front of Xianxia was different. Perhaps it was because it was an immortal, so this anglerfish did not look ugly. Instead, it gave people a feeling of stupidity and cute. Looking at it carefully, it was a fish of the Asian anglerfish. Unlike an anglerfish's body it had a layer of golden scales on its body, looked like the protagonist of the clownfish in Finding Nemo. Its body was as fat as a basketball, and it had a lantern on its head. Looking at its silly appearance and its timid little eyes, Xianxia made a decision in an instant, and that was to catch it and bring it back to Nian as a pet. As for fish, although it could not be held in the hand to play with at all times, it could be placed in the fish tank for viewing. Thinking of this, Xianxia smiled and flew over the coral reef where the fish was. This unlucky anglerfish hid timidly in the coral reef, and probably would never understand. Why was he so unlucky? In the courtyard, when the little girl was awakened by a burst of clatter-clatter noise, she lay by the window with a dull look in her eyes. In the courtyard, several workers were moving a huge fish tank to the steps of the west wing under Xianxia's command. "Mama, what are they doing?" After looking for a while, the little girl rubbed her eyes, and then obediently went to the bathroom under Qin Ruoying's lead. "Daddy bought you a fish, so we have to put a fish tank at home to raise fish," Qin Ruoying explained with a smile. But this little thing seemed to have misunderstood, so she pouted and muttered softly, "I don't like to eat fish of bones." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying was a little dumbfounded. She pinched her little face and explained, "This fish is not for eating." "Not for eating? Then what is it for?" "For you to see." "I don't want to see. I don't like fish." Because fish had bones, she didn't like to eat fish, and then she didn't like this kind of animal. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying didn't say anything more to her. Anyway, she would be able to see the fish in a while. After the little girl finished her breakfast under Qin Ruoying's care, She carried the big cat and stepped out of the west wing door. When Xianxia saw her coming out, he shouted for her to come to his side. "Nyan, come, Daddy bought you a new pet, do you like it?" As he said that, Xianxia carried her to the fish tank. This fish tank was 3 to 4 meters long, and placed on the steps of the west wing, it almost blocked the wall. However, when the little fellow saw the dull gray stones and the strangely shaped corals, it shook its head with a stupefied expression. It was obvious that her heart didn't waver. Seeing this, Xianxia immediately put his right hand on the panel on the side of the fish tank, and then said to her mysteriously, "Dang, dang, dang, it's time to witness a miracle." After saying that, Xianxia pressed the light switch of the fish tank. Because of the refraction of light, a fish tank without lights and a fish tank with lights on were simply two different things. Therefore, the moment the light was turned on, the little thing's eyes suddenly lit up. Corals, shells, and seaweed, these things that came from the sea, under the illumination of the lights, suddenly presented a dreamy beauty. "Oh, it's so beautiful!" Seeing that the fish tank was so beautiful, the little girl suddenly cried out happily. The guests entered, but the protagonist didn't appear for a long time. Therefore, Xianxia patted the fish tank and quietly released a stream of vital essence. At this time, the silly anteater was like a cat whose tail was stepped on, and suddenly came out of the coral cave. "Papa, fish. It has a lantern on its head." After seeing the silly anteater, the little girl was immediately attracted by the lantern on its head. She was already very excited, but the big cat in her arms was even more excited. The moment the anteater appeared, the big cat jumped out of the little girl's arms directly to the top of the fish tank, and then stretched out its claws to catch the fish. What was happiness? Happiness was when cats ate fish, dogs ate meat, and Ultraman beat up small monsters. The big cat also noticed that the fish was not simple, so it wanted to weigh how much it weighed. However, at the moment it stretched out its claws, Xianxia grabbed its neck, and then brought it in front of him, and said to it word by word, "I'm warning you, don't touch it. If I find out that you ate it, tell me, do you like steamed or braised?" Hearing this, the big cat suddenly shook its head excitedly. Perhaps it was because it was too excited, its body was trembling slightly. Chapter 324. With the appearance of the fish tank, the huge courtyard finally had one more permanent resident. This anglerfish's head was very big, so when the little guy asked what it should be called, Xianxia decisively gave it a name, Big Head. It was especially vivid and vivid. At the same time, it sounded like it complemented the two words big cat, big head. Because her vocabulary was too small, after the little one whispered the name in her mouth, she said with a happy face, "Big head sounds good. This is big cat, this is big head. Fish, fish, you'll be called Big Head from now on. Okay?" Big Head was a deep-sea fish and had never been in contact with humans, so it naturally didn't understand what the little one was saying. However, although it didn't understand what the little one was saying, the big cat next to it understood. So, it immediately rolled its eyes in a very human-like way. It was obviously a cat, but its eyes revealed a very disdainful feeling. Such a proud performance in the eyes of Xianxia naturally couldn't avoid giving it a slap. After settling Big Head, the family of three faced the late spring sun and leisurely walked out of the tea house. After not coming back for 2 months, a light layer of dust had already accumulated in the tea house. The couple rolled up their sleeves and began to clean. As for the little girl, she slipped into her own children's playground and happily played with building blocks by herself. However, she didn't play for long before there was a sudden burst of shouting outside the tea house. "Nyan, Nyan, we're here." After not seeing each other for a long time, the two brothers were not polite at all. After each of them pushed open a glass door, the two brothers jumped into the tea house side by side. Gu Lao thought that the two brothers would wait for the old man to enter before letting go. He didn't expect that just as he walked to the door, the glass door had already bounced back and almost hit him in the face. This troublesome child. Seeing this, Gu Lao helplessly shook his head, then opened the door and greeted Xianxia and his wife. As usual, after making a pot of tea, Xianxia played Go with the old man. The three little things were making a ruckus in the children's playground. Qin Ruing turned on the stereo and played some soothing light music. Then, she picked up a book called Collection of Flowers and sat in the booth next to the children's playground. In this warm spring season, this small tea house hidden in the corner of Hohai had a kind of leisurely and carefree atmosphere. At the same time, it was relaxed and lively. Unfortunately, although the tea house was good, it rarely had customers. Today was not the weekend, so it was not until Gu Lao brought the two brothers home for lunch that the door of the tea house was finally pushed open. He was still not a guest. The little fellow looked up. Wasn't this person Xiao Yuan, whom he hadn't seen for a long time? She didn't contact Xianxia in advance, but she didn't expect that she would, coincidentally, rush over on the first day of the tea house's opening. If I remember correctly, Beijing Normal University is not that close to Hohai, right? Why did she just happen to wander over? Boss? Xiao Yuan had just walked into the tea house when she looked up and saw Qin Shi and his family sitting around a tea table preparing to eat. Therefore, she immediately lowered her head in embarrassment. She felt like she was here to freeload. Sister, you're here? Let's eat. Come on. The little fellow waved the chopsticks in his hand and shouted excitedly. In fact, since the end of the winter vacation, Xiao Yuan would visit Hohai every day. She wanted to come over and help when the tea house opened. She didn't know why she liked to come here. Repaying kindness was only one reason. On the other hand, it was probably because of the boss family of three. Although the boss didn't look much older than her, he always gave people the feeling that he had seen the world. Coupled with the knowledgeable and virtuous lady boss, as well as the lively and cute little guy, Xiao Yuan always wanted to follow them around and learn from them in detail. This was not homework, nor was it work. It was an attitude towards life. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps. Birds of a feather flock together. Xiao Yuan felt that she might have met the light in her life. Unknowingly, she was influenced by the husband and wife, which caused her to have a change from the inside out. This change wasn't obvious, but hidden. Perhaps it would be many years later that she would truly realize what she had learned as a waitress here. Although the tea house didn't need to hire waiters, Qin Shi obviously couldn't just chase them away. Therefore, after Xiao Yuan repeatedly promised that she wouldn't fall behind in her homework, Qin Shi finally gave her the keys to the tea house. From now on, she would be the shopkeeper here. An ordinary and leisurely day passed just like that. Xiao Yuan took some time to go to school to get her suitcase. Then, she once again moved into the courtyard. As soon as she stepped through the drooping flower gate, she saw the huge fish tank and the big cat that was lying on top of the fish tank and kept meowing into the tank. Every time the big cat meowed, Big Head would immediately spit out a series of bubbles as if it was responding to it. The fish and the cat were communicating in a way that was completely incomprehensible to humans. Is this a anglerfish? The moment she saw the fish, such a question appeared in Xiao Yuan's mind. If she remembered correctly, the anglerfish should not have scales, right? This fish, what kind of fish was it? Why did it feel a little strange? Although Xiao Yuan felt that it was a little strange, she didn't ask much. She had already made up her mind to follow the boss in the future. She would see more, learn more, and do more. Although she was only a waitress in the tea house, when she held the keys to the tea house, a fighting spirit ignited in her heart for no reason. The peaceful and indifferent life kept repeating itself. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, it was summer. This morning, while the little girl was feeding the fish, Qin Shi quietly came to her side, and then asked mysteriously, "Ningyan, come, Daddy wants to ask you a question. Do you know what day it is tomorrow?" Hearing this, the little girl tilted her head and thought for a while. But after thinking for a long time, she still couldn't think of a reason, so she shook her head blankly. "Think again." Qin Shi asked again. But the little girl shook her head again. Qin Shi had no choice but to cough lightly and remind her, "Today is May 5th. Hearing this, the little girl still didn't seem to react, and the expression on her face looked very cute. Qin Shi was silent. Then he suddenly raised both hands, like a child, and shouted very exaggeratedly, "Today is your birthday. Are you happy?" "Birthday?" The little girl was obviously stunned, but then, as if nothing had happened, She turned around and continued to throw minced meat into the fish tank. Big Head opened its bloody mouth. Every time it swallowed a piece of minced meat, it happily turned around in the water. And the big cat was lying on the side, and from time to time, it would poke its head out to snatch a piece of meat to eat. This behavior made Big Head so angry that it kept bubbling in its mouth. This scene made Xianxia stunned. Strange. Nian Yan's reaction was not right, but after thinking about it, Xianxia understood what was going on with the little girl. Chapter 325. Xianxia had discussed with Qin Ruing for a long time about how to arrange Nian Yan's birthday. On her birthday, he would take her to fly in the sky, travel the 4 seas, look at the land of the divine land, and see all the beautiful scenery. Although the idea was quite tempting, after some consideration, Xianxia finally decided to let Nian Yan live a normal childhood. After all, this was not the Tianyuan world, and Nian Yan would have to go to school in the future. If he really let her come into contact with the world of immortal cultivators in advance, then when other children were talking about toys and cartoons, wouldn't Nian Yan be talking about how high and how deep the sea was? Let me tell you a secret. Actually, my papa is Superman. He is invulnerable and can fly. When he thought that Nian Yan might use such a proud tone to show off to her classmates in the future, Xianxia couldn't help but imagine their reactions. Ridicule was inevitable. Children nowadays were very precocious, and they already knew a lot of things when they were just a few years old. Many children thought that their father was Superman, but reality would always teach them a lesson. How could there be Superman in this world? So they would turn to ridicule those children who always thought that their father was Superman. If your father is so powerful, why don't you save the world? But the more they ridiculed her, the angrier Nian Yan would be, and then she would want to prove that she wasn't lying. After all, she knew that her father could really fly. Nian Yan wasn't lying, but who would believe such a thing that sounded like a fantasy story? Other people's fathers couldn't fly. Why could your father fly? From the moment she said that her father was Superman, Nian Yan was no longer sociable, so everyone only ridiculed her even more. She said that her father is Superman. Do you believe it? I don't believe it. She must be bragging. Mom said not to play with bragging children. We have to stay away from her. Bragging King Ba. Of course, Xianxia didn't want to see such a thing happen, so after much consideration, he decided to arrange an ordinary and happy birthday for Nian Yan. Even if he didn't take her to fly, Xianxia believed this day would be the best memory of Nian Yan's life. Therefore, after Xianxia comforted Nian Yan's inexplicable emotions, the family of 3 set off directly. They didn't bring the big cat, nor did they call the twins. Because all the activities today only him and Yingying were needed. After Xianxia got into the taxi with Nian Yan in her arms, the little guy's mood was obviously relieved, so she nestled in his arms and asked softly, "Papa, where are we going?" As she spoke, she looked at Xianxia with her big, cute eyes. Needless to say, her small eyes were naturally filled with anticipation and desire. Papa and Mama were going to celebrate her birthday with her today. Since Xianxia wanted to give Nian Yan a birthday that a normal child should have, naturally, he had to plan carefully. After all, he wasn't the kind of parent who worked overtime all day and couldn't even spare time to celebrate a child's birthday. "I'll take you to a fun place. Papa promises that you'll have a good time today." "Really? Where is it?" Hearing this, Xianxia immediately smiled, and then said mysteriously, "It's a secret for now." He wanted to keep it a secret, but this little girl was impatient, so she kept shaking his arm and said coquettishly, "Papa, tell me. Tell me." Okay, I'll tell you." Xianxia couldn't persuade this little girl, so after gently pinching her little face, he explained with a smile, "Today, I'll take you to the big world to play." "The big world?" The little guy pouted his little mouth and muttered this noun, but a blank expression appeared on his face. Because in her little brain, there was no place called the big world. Of course, the big world that Xianxia was talking about was not the big world hidden behind the divine gate, but the children's paradise world. This was a large outdoor expansion park that covered an area of 150 acres in the western suburbs of Shangjing. Although it was not as big as Disneyland in Zhonghai, It had its own characteristics and could be regarded as a holy place in the minds of children. The theme of the park was forest. So as soon as the little girl came to the gate of the park, she cried out, "Papa, there are so many trees here." It was the end of spring and the summer solstice. The park was full of towering trees with luxuriant foliage, and the lush leaves were natural umbrellas. Walking on the stone path under the shade of the trees and looking at the green grass under the feet would inadvertently give people a very comfortable feeling. The slogan of the park was, "Let children return to the forest and experience the best natural scenery." Since it was a children's paradise, naturally, a series of outdoor entertainment facilities were the most popular among children. But unlike other children's paradises, most of the children's facilities here were closely integrated with the forest. For example, the climbing net that was commonly seen in children's paradises was attached to several towering trees. From time to time, the children would climb from one tree to another, looking like lively and cute little monkeys. There was no ceiling or classroom here, and the whole forest was a children's activity area. Running freely in the open-air forest, listening to the sweet sounds of birds and insects. Although it was not as exquisite and beautiful as an indoor amusement park, it had a unique natural charm. The park was very large, and the activity area was naturally large. So after the little girl climbed in the jungle expansion area for a while, she was tired and out of breath. Thus, she was like a spider demon that had just eaten her fill. She sprawled out on the climbing net like that. Seeing this, the couple sat on the grass under the shade of the trees and kept cheering for her. The little fellow rested for a while, and then crawled up, huffing and puffing. When she finally climbed to another big tree and slid down the tree slide, she waved her small hands and threw herself into Qin Ruoying's arms. "Mama. Good, fun, I want to play." Qin Ruoying saw her panting and was ready to pull her to sit next to her. But she didn't expect. After the little guy finished drinking the water, he suddenly broke free from her arms and ran back to the starting point, ready to play again. This child. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying could only shake her head slightly. Since it was a children's paradise, the child's safety was obviously fully guaranteed, so the couple sat aside and cheered the little girl up from time to time so that she could play more happily. It wasn't that Nian hadn't used these facilities before, but she still had a lot of fun today. Therefore, when Xianxia asked her if she had a good time today, the little girl suddenly nodded her head like a chicken pecking at rice. It was good that she was happy. Only when she was happy, it was considered a birthday. Since it was a birthday, naturally, there was a birthday cake. So, after the little girl had played to her heart's content, Xianxia took her to the park's self-service barbecue area. After making a sumptuous barbecue meal for her, Xianxia clapped his hands and signaled the staff next to him to push the cake up. As the cake entered, the band that Xianxia had arranged in advance immediately came to the little girl's side and played a birthday song for her. It wasn't that the park had never held a birthday party before, but it was really the first time that a birthday party was more grand than a marriage proposal for a child's birthday. Therefore, the area where Xianxia's family was immediately surrounded by tourists who were watching the fun. Accompanied by the band's performance, the onlookers, led by Xianxia and Qin Ruoying, sang the birthday song together loudly. "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, healthy birthday to you, have a warm family, Nian, happy birthday." When had the little girl ever seen such a scene? So, she was stunned on the spot. Until Xianxia pushed the cake in front of her, the little girl didn't seem to come back to her senses. Seeing this, Xianxia squatted beside her and said softly, "Nian, happy birthday, come, blow out the candles and you can make a wish, any wish is fine." Chapter 326. Birthday Wish? Looking at the crowd of onlookers, the little girl couldn't help but feel a little dazed, so she timidly grabbed Xianxia's arm. She looked like she had stage fright. In fact, Aunt Zhang had celebrated her birthday before, but she had never mentioned anything about birthday wishes. After all, she was old and naturally did not know much about foreign culture. In the past, her family was poor. A red egg and a bowl of longevity noodles were the best birthday gifts for children. As for birthday cakes, in Aunt Zhang's eyes, Those were just snacks that children like to eat. Since Nian liked them, she would buy them for her. Therefore, Aunt Zhang did not have any concept of making a birthday wish on her birthday, so she had never arranged for it for her. Nian, what birthday wish do you have? Today is your birthday, so you just have to make a wish now. After you blow out the candles, your wish will come true. Xianxia hugged the little girl and explained patiently in her ear. The little girl curled up in Xianxia's arms. After looking up at Xianxia, she pouted and shook her head, as if she could not think of anything she wanted. Seeing this, Xianxia tried to guide her. Nian, you can only make a birthday wish once a year. Don't you have anything in particular that you want? For example, if you want to eat something, play something, or go somewhere, you can tell me now. Daddy promises to satisfy you. Hearing this, the little girl seemed to finally understand the concept of birthday wish. Therefore, she pouted and asked hesitantly, "Can I really make anything come true?" Ahem. This question made Xianxia pause for a moment. At this point, if the little girl made a wish but could not make it come true, wouldn't she be very disappointed? After all, this was the first time she made a birthday wish. Xianxia was a little hesitant about whether to make a promise. However, on second thought, she was just a 5-year-old child. Could she make a wish that was so difficult to make? Therefore, he answered with certainty, "Yes, Father can promise you that no matter what you wish for, it will come true." When he said this, Xianxia's tone was particularly solemn, which made Qin Ruoying, who was beside him, couldn't help but glance at him. This sentence was, what about the father's promise to his daughter? The little fellow didn't feel anything special, so when she heard Xianxia's reply, she smiled happily and said, "Okay. Then I have a wish." With that said, under the guidance of Xianxia, she stood on the bench facing the cake. Then, she put her hands together, closed her eyes, and prepared to make a wish. Looking at her serious face, the crowd immediately quieted down, afraid to disturb this cute little girl. She didn't think for long before she suddenly opened her eyes and said excitedly, "My wish is, Papa and Mama have to stay by my side forever." After that, the little thing puffed up its little mouth and tried its best to blow out all 5 candles on the cake. A child's mind was not so complicated. She said what she thought. However, it was such a simple and somewhat unrealistic wish that directly displayed the thoughts in the depths of her heart. Xianxia held the little fellow in his arms and didn't speak immediately, but the crowd around them burst into laughter. After hearing the little fellow's wish, a middle-aged man with a child immediately said with a smile, "Silly girl, when you get married, how can your parents stay by your side? At that time, you'll want to drive them away. That's right. A married daughter is like spilled water. My child won't come back to accompany us a few times a year unless she is wronged at home. If she doesn't come to accompany you, you can go to her. Do you think she dares to drive you out of the house? Hey, they are busy making grandchildren. How can I disturb them?" This conversation also amused the onlookers and made them laugh one after another. However, the little fellow was not happy. She immediately pouted and shouted unhappily, "No. I don't want to get married. I want to be with Papa and Mama. Forever and ever." After saying that, she even made a face with an unconvinced expression, which immediately made everyone laugh out loud. "Oh, your child is so cute. If my child is so cute, I will consider not letting her marry in the future. Don't, you have to ask the child if she is willing to do this first. Otherwise, it will be too late for you to regret it if they elope. Don't jinx it." The crowd of onlookers kept talking, and the atmosphere was very lively. Seeing this, the little fellow pulled Qin Ruing's hand, pointed to the cake on the table and shouted, "Mama, I want to eat cake." Silly child. Hearing this, Qin Ruing rubbed her head with a smile. "You are a child, but you don't know that your parents have already taken it seriously." The couple looked at each other silently. After that, Xianxia gently pecked the little fellow's face, then stood up and asked the crowd to eat the cake with Qin Ruing. Good things naturally had to be shared. There were a lot of people, so the birthday girl was only given a small piece of such a big cake. Although there wasn't much cake, when she saw that everyone was holding her birthday cake, her little face bloomed with joy. So many people were celebrating her birthday with her. She was so happy. After eating the cake, the crowd of onlookers left their blessings and dispersed. The reason why the couple chose to bring the little fellow here for her birthday today was mainly because there was a parent-child camping area in the park. Therefore, when Xianxia opened the rented tent by the lake, the little fellow immediately got in excitedly, and then excitedly turned over and over on the mat. "Papa, come in. Mama, come in." At this moment, it was already evening and the sky was red. The family of 3 lay in the tent, quietly looking up at the sunset. The green grass, the clear lake, the towering trees, and the sound of insects and birds from time to time. At this moment, the family of 3 was particularly peaceful. The little fellow put her head on Xianxia's chest, quietly watching the sunset dye the sky and the water red. Perhaps she also realized that the wish she had just made was not reliable, so she could not help muttering, "Papa, Mama, What's wrong? Don't leave me again, okay? I don't want to be a wild child." Hearing this, Xianxia suddenly felt a surge of warmth in his heart. Even with his age and experience, he could not control the sudden burst of emotion for a while. Therefore, Xianxia immediately hugged the little fellow with one hand and Qin Ruing with the other, and replied very solemnly, "Okay." This warm atmosphere seemed to have infected Qin Ruing, so she followed the little fellow and leaned her head on Xianxia's chest. Then, the mother and daughter leaned on Xianxia's chest like this, blinking their eyes and looking at each other. "Nian, come on, Dad will teach you a song? Is it Little Star?" No, I'll teach you a new song today." "Okay. Then listen carefully, I'll sing it once first." After that, Xianxia began to hum softly. This song was very simple, and the melody was not very complicated, so after listening to it twice, the little fellow could hum along with Xianxia. Xianxia's low voice, coupled with Qin Ruing's quiet and gentle voice, plus the little fellow's clear and melodious childish voice. This song, "Insects Fly," which always gave people a feeling of sadness, was unexpectedly sung by this family of 3 with a happy and cheerful taste. The dark sky hung low, followed by the bright stars. Insects fly, who are you thinking of? The stars in the sky shed tears, the roses on the ground withered. The cold wind blows, as long as you're with me. Insects fly, flowers sleep, pairs after pairs are beautiful. I'm not afraid of darkness, I'm only afraid of heartbreak. Chapter 327. It was a very ordinary birthday, but it was destined to be the most precious memory in the little girl's life. There was a gentle breeze by the lakeside, a lush green meadow, and a lush forest. The family of 3 lay lazily in the tent and fell asleep under the accompaniment of the starlight. It wasn't until the sun rose again that the little girl opened her eyes in a daze under the sunlight. The important birthday passed just like that, but her interest didn't seem to have waned at all. So, as soon as she got up, the little girl squatted by the lake and happily played with the lake water. Seeing this, Xianxia took her to breathe the first breath of fresh morning air while doing exercises by the lake. "Nian, Daddy will teach you how to do morning exercises, right?" "But, good girl, then come over and stand behind me. I'll do one, you do another, 1 2 3 4, 2 2 3 4, very good, next is body rotation exercise, walk." Xianxia acted as a physical education teacher, standing by the lake and shouting slogans while doing standard movements. The little girl followed behind Xianxia's butt, doing her best to twist her butt and shake her hands. That silly look looked very cute. As Xianxia's magical slogan continued to ring out, many parents seemed to be infected by him. So, they brought their children behind them and started to do the radio calisthenics with the father and daughter pair. After finishing their morning exercises and eating breakfast, the family of 3 finally got on the car to return home. On the way back, Xianxia played the role of a language teacher and gave the little girl an essay question. The question was, "The most unforgettable day." The little girl was very interested in this question that was obviously out of the syllabus. So, Xianxia told the little guy about the 6 essentials of writing, and under his patient guidance, the little guy was able to draw inferences about other things from one example and successfully wrote the first essay of his life. The only regret was, Nian still didn't know how to write, so there was no way to write this essay on paper. However, Xianxia believed that when Nian attended language classes in the future, this piece of the most unforgettable day would definitely become a model for her teacher's lectures. Under their tutelage, Nian would definitely become an excellent Chinese class representative in the future. In this regard, Xianxia was full of confidence. It was a sunny afternoon in Hohai, a quiet and cozy little tea house. The leisurely days passed by slowly. Until this day, May 20th. Only half a month had passed since Nian's birthday. Logically speaking, with the dry summer weather, there should be very little fog in the morning. But today, he didn't know why. In the morning, as soon as the little girl opened the door, she saw a foggy scene, as if winter was coming. The thick fog obscured their vision. The little fellow stood outside the door of the west wing. When she raised her head, she couldn't even see the door of the east wing clearly. The visibility was at most 5 meters. Standing in the courtyard and looking at the sky, the thick fog even covered the brilliant morning sun. The fog cast a mysterious veil over the familiar things around him. Standing in the courtyard and looking at the sky, the thick fog even covered the brilliant morning sun. The whole sky was gloomy. In this regard, the little fellow was particularly excited. She actually played hide and seek with the big cat in the fog. The big cat circled around the courtyard, and the little fellow chased after it. Because she ran too fast, when she realized that there was someone in front of her, it was too late to stop. Thus, the little fellow fell into the arms of that person. Nian, run slower. Be careful not to fall. The little fellow looked up and found that she had fallen into Qin Yongyan's arms. She immediately opened her mouth and sweetly called, "Grandpa, good girl, go play." Qin Yongyan touched the little fellow's head, and then gently let go of her. After this period of cultivation, Qin Yongyan's cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds. He was originally a master of gang strength, so when he refined all the genuine qi in his body into genuine essence, his cultivation smoothly reached the late stage of foundation establishment. He was only one step away from becoming a legendary celestial being. Qin Yongyan stood on the stairs outside the main hall and looked at the sky thoughtfully. Only then did he turn his head to look at the west wing. Then he suddenly nodded in that direction, as if he was greeting someone. The little fellow continued to chase the big cat in the courtyard. Suddenly, a pair of big hands stretched out from the fog and directly picked up the naughty little fellow from the ground. "Nian, stop playing. It's time for breakfast." Xianxia's gentle voice rang in the little fellow's ears. So, the little fellow immediately put her arms around Xianxia's neck and said coquettishly, "Papa, I want to eat crystal shrimp dumplings." Didn't you say you wanted to eat soup dumplings today?" "No soup dumplings. I want crystal shrimp dumplings." Xianxia was obviously prepared for this little fellow who often changed her mind, so he pinched her nose and said with a smile, "I knew you would do this. Let's go. We have both. You can eat whichever you like. Papa is so nice." It was obvious that this sudden fog was a sign of the arrival of the heavenly anomaly. Just as Bai Hong had said, the gate of heaven would open again very soon. Xianxia didn't think too much about this. The gate of heaven opened for a limited time each time. Even if the people of Heaven Capital were determined to investigate, what could they find in such a short time? The village had been destroyed, and Bai Hong and her people were either dead or injured. They were still locked in the cave at the bottom of the sea. Everything that needed to be dealt with had already been arranged properly. Who would know that he was the one who did all this? What's more, even if they knew, what could they do? If a cultivator at the soul formation stage was determined to hide, it was definitely not so easy to find. Right now, Xianxia only wanted to live a low-key life, so when this fog appeared, he acted like he did a few days ago. He ate, slept, and acted as if everything had nothing to do with him. Therefore, after the family of 3 had breakfast, they prepared to open the tea house as usual. But just as they were about to walk out of the courtyard, Qin Ruing suddenly stopped. She frowned and looked a little uncomfortable. "Ying? What's wrong?" Xianxia immediately noticed Qin Ruing's strangeness, so he hurried to her side and held her hand very nervously. "Nothing. I just felt a little dizzy just now. I'm fine now." Hearing this, Xianxia couldn't help but look at Qin Ruiying with slight surprise. Dizzy? What a joke, what's Yingying's cultivation level? How could she feel dizzy? At the thought of this, Xianxia immediately released a trace of true essence, and then carefully sorted out Qin Ruiying's physical condition. He didn't find any problems. But the more it was like this, the more worried Xianxia was. Yingying could get sick? Xianxia's expression was a little uncertain. In order not to worry him, Qin Ruiying seriously felt her own situation, and then said with a smile, It's really nothing. Maybe it's because I was a little absent-minded just now, so I felt like this. Now I'm fine. Qin Ruiying signaled Xianxia not to worry. At this time, the little fellow, who had already run out of the door with Xiao Yuan, turned her head and found that her parents didn't follow, so she quickly ran back. Papa? What's wrong? The little fellow looked at Xianxia in confusion. Seeing his dignified look, she carefully stretched out her small hand and pulled the corner of Xianxia's clothes. Xianxia was silent for a while, and then suddenly said to Xiao Yuan, Xiao, you go and open the door first. Yingying is a little uncomfortable today. I'll take her to the hospital. Okay, boss, I'll go and open the door first. After Xiao Yuan left, Xianxia ignored Qin Ruiying's objection and took her directly back to the room. Nian, Papa is going to check Mama's body. You watch cartoons by yourself first. When Papa is sure that Mama is fine, I'll take you to the tea house, okay? Okay. The little fellow nodded very sensibly, and then sat on the bed obediently. Seeing Xianxia's dignified look, Qin Ruiying gently squeezed his hand and said with a smile, I'm really fine. Hearing this, Xianxia directly interrupted her, and then said with a serious face, Good girl, I'll check whether you're fine or not. Chapter 328. Some people could become a world-class superstar by playing football, while others could become an Olympic champion by diving. But if one wanted to reach the top of the world in something, it was definitely not something that could be achieved by hard work alone. Everything had to be about talent. Even when playing games, some people could reach the diamond rank after playing for 3 months, while others were still struggling in the silver rank after playing for 3 years. There were geniuses in all walks of life, but in this world, most of them were ordinary people who could not even compare to others in playing games. Qin Ruiying was such an ordinary person. At least, in terms of cultivation, she really did not have any outstanding points. So even with Xianxia, a soul formation expert, training with her all day long, Qin Ruiying's improvement was still so slow. With this kind of cultivation talent, if placed in the Sky Yen God sect, she might not even be as good as the most ordinary outer disciple, but there was no other way, who asked her to have a strong background. Of course, poor aptitude was one thing, but no matter how bad Qin Ruiying was, she was still a cultivator who had stepped into the foundation establishment stage. Even martial artists could be immune to all kinds of diseases, let alone cultivators. Therefore, when Qin Ruiying said that she was a little dizzy, Xianxia's reaction was obviously a little overboard. As the saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. Perhaps it was because Qin Ruiying had lost her yin spirit previously, Xianxia now paid extra attention to any abnormal situation. For the sake of caution, Xianxia even used the amplification effect of the soul crystal and carefully checked the situation of Qin Ruiying's soul. Qin Ruiying's yin spirit had already returned, so no matter how Xianxia looked, he did not find any problems. Could it be? Was it really like what Yingying said, because she was a little absent-minded just now, so she suddenly felt a little dizzy? Psychological effect? While Xianxia was depressed, the little fellow was secretly paying attention to his expression. As soon as she saw the expression on Xianxia's face slightly relax, this clever little thing eagerly came to his side, then hugged his arm and acted like a spoiled child. Papa, what's wrong with Mama? This silly child has learned how to read people's expressions. Seeing this, Xianxia pinched her little face and said with a smile, Mommy is fine. Let's go. I'll take you to the tea house to play with your brothers. All right. Since Qin Ruiying was indeed fine, Xianxia could naturally put down the big stone in his heart. When the family of 3 walked out of the west wing again, the thick fog in front of them still hadn't disappeared. The heavenly anomaly this time, could it have happened in Shangjing? Xianxia looked up at the sky and observed for a while. In the end, he did not want to go and investigate. Instead, he carried the little fellow and walked straight into the tea house. Whether it was the recovery of spirit energy or the opening of the heavenly gates, none of this had anything to do with Xianxia. Whether it was in the past or in the present, his ambition had never changed, and that was 30 mu of land, a cow, and a warm bed for his wife and children. Just a few simple sayings, but they were enough to describe the ideal life in his heart. While Xianxia was busy accompanying his wife and children, Xianxia Glacier, Beiyao Temple. Xianxia had long guessed that someone might come to the Beiyao Temple to check the situation, so he removed the restrictions outside the temple long ago. At the top of the snowy mountain, the wind and snow seemed to never calm down for a moment. The mountain wind whistled past, mixed with bursts of snowflakes fluttering in the air. It was obviously a beautiful dynamic picture, but it gave people a sense of peace and tranquility. At this moment, it seemed that even time had stopped. In the wind and snow, two figures were particularly conspicuous, like 2 drops of ink on a piece of rice paper. One of them was relatively young, about 30 years old. The other person's hair and beard were all white, and he wore a green robe. He seemed to have a kind of sage-like charm. The young man was holding a bronze mirror in his hand, but the surface of this bronze mirror was dark. But there was something strange about it. There was a metallic luster flowing on the surface of the black mirror. From afar, this bronze mirror looked like a black hole, with a mysterious and wonderful beauty. Master, if the records of the divination pavilion are not wrong, the Beiyao Temple should be here. The young man looked around, but under the wind and snow, what could he see except for the white snow? The snow had already drowned everything. The old man frowned and cast his gaze on a snowy area. Immediately after, he gently waved his sleeve, and an invisible force suddenly burst out. Like a stone smashing into water, the accumulated snow on the snowy ground immediately exploded and scattered in all directions, turning into snowflakes that fluttered in the air. Then, the old man waved his sleeve again, and a gust of wind suddenly blew in the air. In an instant, the snow that covered the sky and the sun was all blown to another mountaintop. The wind and snow suddenly stopped. A black building suddenly appeared in the old man's line of sight. This unopened sacred hall was like a flower bud waiting to bloom, standing alone on the mountain peak. Seeing this, the young man immediately soared into the air and flew above the hall in the blink of an eye. He held the mirror and looked at the hall. Immediately, as if some mechanism had been activated, a series of rotating sounds could be heard in the hall. Then, this black hall slowly bloomed under the young man's slightly bewildered eyes. This is the Beiyao Temple. The young man landed in the center of the hall and carefully looked at the strange patterns on the floor. But just as he was curious about the things around him, the old man suddenly called out to him. "Wuxia, there's no need to look. Let's go." Hearing this, the young man called Wuxia immediately flew back to the old man's side, and then asked with a puzzled expression, "Master, what happened to this temple?" "The evil spirit has been destroyed, and the soul crystal has been lost. Without these 2 cores, the Beiyao Temple can be considered to be completely destroyed. Is there no way to repair it?" "There's no way." The old man shook his head, then suddenly asked, "Wuxia, carefully feel the aura here and see if you can sense anything?" After hearing the old man's words, the young man sat cross-legged in the air, held his breath, and carefully felt the surrounding spirit of heaven and earth. "Master, this place seems to have the aura of senior brother Baihong. He should have been here before. Is that so?" After the old man glanced at the black lotus below, he waved his sleeve again. The wind and snow all over the sky suddenly surged. The old man did not use true essence to protect his body. Instead, he allowed the goose feather-like snow to continuously fall on his body. Therefore, in a short while, the old man's body was covered with a shallow layer of white snow. "They came in a hurry, and they left in a hurry. If I'm not wrong, they're probably dead by now. What?" Hearing this, the young man's face couldn't help but change drastically. He looked quite excited and asked, "There is still someone in the lower realm who can hurt senior brother?" "Why not?" "Moreover, Are you so sure that the person who hurt them must be from the lower realm? Master, I don't understand what you mean. If you don't understand, think more. Seeing the old man's serious expression, the young man wisely shut his mouth. Then, the old man thoughtfully looked at the bronze mirror in the young man's hand. Let's talk about this later. The most important thing now is how to deal with the prophecy left by the divine ancestor. The Beiyao temple is destroyed, and one of the 5 is missing. Perhaps the divine ancestor expected this to happen back then, so he left this soul mirror behind. Let's go to the All Saints Valley first. I hope nothing happened to the inheritance of Si Ming Xian Nu. Chapter 329. The heavy fog lasted for about 2 hours. Because such a heavy fog was so rare, CCTV even made a special report to analyze the reasons for the heavy fog in summer from all aspects. Chen Shi and Gu Lao were drinking tea while listening to the experts on TV blabber on and on. Experts analyzed many possibilities, but the final conclusion was still related to global warming, the greenhouse effect, and such terms that people were already familiar with. No matter what the situation was, as long as there was an abnormal climate, it was definitely due to environmental degradation. Therefore, the experts only repeatedly appealed on TV, hoping that people would spontaneously protect the environment and protect the common home of all mankind. Only a very small number of people knew, what did the appearance of the heaven and earth phenomenon mean? Although Chen Shi was in the tea house, his mind was always outside the house. When the heavy fog dissipated, the hot summer's sun once again shone on Hohai Old Street. Chen Shi smiled and retracted his divine sense. The heavy fog dissipated, which meant that the gate of heaven was closed, and those people should naturally go back. This was undoubtedly good news for Chen Shi. He was not afraid of them, he just didn't want to trouble them. After all, Chen Shi had long passed the age of yelling and killing. Being able to quietly drink tea for a while was more appropriate for an old man like him. Chen Shi and Gu Lao chatted about the recent abnormal weather. While they were chatting, Gu Lao seemed to be touched by something. After a moment of silence, he couldn't help but sigh softly. The ancients said that whenever there is a heaven and earth phenomenon, something big must happen. Chen Shi thought he was referring to the recent weather, so he smiled and didn't say anything. Gu Lao's mind drifted further and further. Before Chen Shi could speak, he continued, I didn't see anything big, but recently, strange things have been happening one after another. Oh? Hearing this, Chen Shi finally seemed to be interested, so he smiled and asked, what strange things have you encountered recently? Sigh, maybe it's because I'm old, so this old man is becoming more and more superstitious. Gu Lao smiled and shook his head. After looking at Chen Shi thoughtfully, he sighed softly, there are some things that I've been keeping in my heart for a long time. Little Chen, I can see that you're not an ordinary person. If you're willing to listen, I can tell you about it. Just treat it as listening to an old man complain. Chen Shi had known Gu Lao for some time, but he had never seen him show such an expression, so he immediately smiled and said, interesting, why don't you tell me about it first? Let me make this clear first. You youngsters should just treat this as a joke. Don't take it to heart, it's nothing, we're just chatting. Don't worry, I'm not a blabbermouth. Alright, it's actually like this. Then, Gu Lao spoke of the things that had been buried in his heart all this time. The old man had never mentioned his family matters to Chen Shi before, but he didn't expect to spill it all out this time. Gu Lao had a daughter, the mother of the 2 brothers, named Gu Yao. But what was regrettable was that, just when Chen Shi moved from Zhonghai to Beijing with Nian Yan, Gu Yao died in a car accident. Gu Lao used to live in his hometown in Jizhou. Because of Gu Yao's death, he returned to Hohai to take care of the 2 children for his daughter. In fact, Chen Shi had already guessed that there might be something going on in Gu Lao's family. After all, if it was a normal family, how could an old man like Gu Lao take care of the children 365 days a year? And there were 2 of them at once. Not to mention whether he had the energy or not. Didn't the children miss their parents at all? What about their parents? No matter how busy they were, there had to be a limit, right? The 2 brothers rarely mentioned their father, which meant that they didn't like their father. The children were still young, so Gu Lao could only lie to the two children that their mother had something to do abroad and would only come back once in a while. This excuse was just like how Auntie Zhang used to lie to Nian. But here was the strange thing. The reason why these two silly children didn't clamor for their mother was that Gu Yao often came back to see them. Moreover, the frequency of her coming back was obviously much higher than before. I buried Yao Yao with my own hands in the back of the mountain in my hometown. One day after dinner, I was watching TV in the room, and the two of them suddenly ran to me and told me that their mother was back. You don't know, when I heard this sentence, my first reaction was that all the hair on my body stood up. Yao Yao is my daughter and their mother, so I believe that even if she became a ghost, she would never hurt me and the children. But you also know, there is a difference between humans and ghosts. How can humans stay with ghosts? So, since that happened, I took the children out every day until it was dark, because I was afraid that if they stayed with Yao Yao for too long, they would be infected with yin energy. After hearing Gu Lao's strange words, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, she couldn't help but interrupt him and ask, "Are you so sure that the child's mother has become a ghost? How can there be ghosts in this world? Have you seen one?" Although I can't see it, the two of them can. Speaking of this, Gu Lao turned to the direction of the children's park and asked loudly, when was the last time your mother came back?" The older brother was busy playing marbles with the little guy, so the one who answered was the younger brother. "Yesterday. Mom just came back yesterday." After that, the younger brother immediately lay back on the cushion, because it was his turn to play. The three children played happily in the children's park, but Gu Lao could only shake his head and sigh. In this regard, she didn't know what to say. Ghosts. It's just a lingering spirit after death. From the perspective of immortal cultivators, the spirit was just a kind of pure and weak energy body. It couldn't even be called a life. Everything has a spirit. Not only human beings will leave behind a spirit after death. If it's a spirit left behind by a living creature, it will retain some memories of its life, but it won't be more than 7 days. It's also because the spirit is pure enough that it's easier for the spirit to come into contact with the origin of all things, heaven and earth spiritual chi. Take a human as an example. If soon after a person's death, the spirit happens to float to a place with rich heaven and earth spiritual chi, then it's very likely that it will merge with the heaven and earth spiritual chi and exist in the world as a more powerful energy body. The spirit isn't scary, because they were just weak mortals, animals or even plants when they were alive. A little bit of heaven and earth spiritual chi only provided them with a chance to continue to exist in the world. When the heaven and earth spiritual chi is exhausted, it's the time when they really disappear. This is the fundamental reason why there are so many ghost legends. But now the strange thing is, Gu Yao has been dead for more than half a year, but her spirit hasn't disappeared, and this. Chapter 330. Things like ghosts. In fact, they weren't as mysterious as the legends said. They were just a kind of energy body, so ordinary people couldn't see them at all. But if the ghost suddenly condensed too much yin energy for some unknown reason, it would cause the ghost's soul body to materialize. It was precisely because of this that ordinary people could see ghosts. Of course, this situation was extremely rare. In addition to this situation, there were a very small number of people who could directly see ghosts with their naked eyes. These kinds of people often appeared in folklore, yin-yang eyes. However, the yin-yang eyes wasn't very accurate. Immortal cultivators knew more than ordinary people, so from the perspective of immortal cultivators, the so-called yin-yang eyes was actually far more sensitive than ordinary people, so they could keenly detect signs of spiritual energy or yin energy fluctuations. These people were obviously good seedlings suitable for cultivation. Although she didn't specifically test the brothers' cultivation aptitude, the fact that they could see Gu Yao's ghost meant that the aptitude of these two brothers wouldn't be too bad. Although the seedlings were good, they weren't enough to arouse Shi's interest. What he was more concerned about was, it had been more than half a year, why hadn't Gu Yao's ghost dissipated? One had to know that the ghost of an ordinary person could only last for 7 days at most. Without the nourishment of the physical body, the soul was quite fragile. Even if the cultivation reached the golden core stage, as long as the yuanying hadn't been condensed, it was impossible to exist in the form of a soul for a long time. Xianxia was thinking about the reason why Gu Yao hadn't dissipated. Seeing that he had been silent, Gu Lao thought that Xianxia thought he was crazy, so he immediately shook his head and smiled. Forget it, just treat these things as gossip. Children's words carry no harm. Maybe it's because they miss their mother too much that they have such hallucinations. Night talk in the city, ghosts, and monsters. These things had always been circulating in folklore, and Gu Lao didn't want this matter to make Xianxia feel uncomfortable. After all, even if Gu Yao became a ghost, she was still Gu Lao's biological daughter, so Gu Lao believed that Gu Yao wouldn't hurt him. Xianxia wasn't related to Gu Yao in any way. What if she was accidentally targeted by her? It was better for ordinary people to stay away from such strange things. What's more, Gu Yao had been appearing more and more frequently recently. Every time she appeared, although Gu Lao couldn't see it, he could clearly feel the change in the surrounding temperature. It was clearly a hot summer day, but the room seemed to be air-conditioned. Gu Lao was also worried about this matter, so he couldn't help but tell Xianxia about it. But as soon as he finished speaking, Gu Lao regretted it. It was best not to scare others when it came to their own matters. However, after listening to Gu Lao's words, Xianxia responded with a relaxed smile. Let's not talk about whether these things are superstitious or not, but I see that these two children are usually fine. There are no problems with their physical and mental health. Since it's been more than half a year, there shouldn't be any problems. You can think of it this way. Even if these things are just the children's illusions, at least these illusions can bring a certain degree of comfort to the two of them. Just treat it as a kind of spiritual sustenance. After all, the children are still young. They may not be able to accept the fact that their mother has passed away. When they grow up, you can tell them the truth. Maybe this way it will be easier for them to accept it. Xianxia's words were very vague, but Gu Lao still understood the meaning of his words. Gu Yao had passed away for more than half a year. If she really wanted to hurt her children, something would have happened to these two children long ago. Now these two brothers were alive and kicking all day. It was probably because she loved her children that Gu Yao often returned to visit them. If he thought about it this way, it seemed to be acceptable. Thinking of this, Gu Lao couldn't help but look at Xianxia with a little surprise and asked doubtfully, "Aren't you afraid?" "Afraid of what?" "This kind of bad luck. If I go back to my hometown and tell them, the people in the village will probably drive us out on the spot. The three of us won't be allowed to go back in this life. If you believe it, then it's true. If you don't believe it, then it's not true. I'm a good person, but I don't believe in evil, so this kind of thing will absolutely not scare me." Hearing this, Gu Lao's mood suddenly became much better. After taking a sip of the tea cup, a smile finally appeared on his face and he said, "That's good. I was worried that I would scare you. I won't have such good tea to drink in the future. You can rest assured. I'm one of the 5 good young men of the new era. I have Mao Gai, Maja, and Deng Luan to protect me. I have a 5-star red flag floating above my head and a party emblem hanging on my chest. I guarantee that all evil will be repelled and nothing will be able to invade me." Okay, let's see what you can do. After hearing Xianxia's words, Gu Lao couldn't help but laugh out loud, so he immediately changed the topic and asked with a smile, "Since you are so good, why don't you come to my place for a meal later?" In fact, Gu Lao didn't really want to invite Xianxia home for a meal. He just wanted to use this opportunity to take down his prestige. After all, the two were considered friends despite the difference in age, so they often made some harmless jokes. But what Gu Lao didn't expect was, Xianxia didn't seem to have used his brain to think. After hearing Gu Lao's words, he didn't back down. Instead, he immediately nodded and hurriedly responded, "Okay, I've always wanted to try your cooking. This time, I finally got the opportunity." Old Gu was stunned by Old Gu's eagerness. Gu Lao was stunned for a while, then he shook his head violently, and then said with a complicated expression, "Forget it, I'm just joking with you. In the future, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future. I'm not afraid. What are you afraid of? It's just a meal, it won't get in the way." No, I really can't, it's not safe." "What's not safe?" "It's broad daylight, you're still afraid of ghosts?" How about this, I'll accompany you back to cook now. After it's done, I'll bring it here to eat. Is that okay? Hey, I say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you listen to my advice? Because I'm a party member. Hearing Xianxi's answer, Gu Lao almost choked to death. The two of them struggled for a long time over the matter of freeloading. In the end, Gu Lao couldn't persuade Xianxi, so he had to look at the time helplessly. It was now 3:30 in the afternoon. In fact, what Xianxi said also made sense. There shouldn't be any problems in broad daylight, so after hesitating for a while, Gu Lao reluctantly agreed to Xianxi's proposal. So, Xianxi immediately said goodbye to Qin Ruoying, then pulled Gu Lao out. Gu Lao's home was also near Hohai. It was less than 500 meters away from the tea house, but it had to circle around Hohai. On the way back, Gu Lao was still struggling whether to take him home. Seeing this, Xianxi immediately found a topic to divert Gu Lao's attention, so he pretended to be curious and asked, "Hey, by the way, where's the child's father? Why haven't I heard you mention it to the child?" As soon as these words came out, Gu Lao's face suddenly became a lot worse. Chapter 331. Heartless Man? After hearing this sentence, Xianxi's curiosity was suddenly aroused. Could it be those vulgar scenes of abandoning one's wife and children? However, this was someone else's family affair after all, and it was a scandal, so Xianxi couldn't ask further, so he wisely shut his mouth. This question obviously touched the old man's mind, so after Gu Lao was silent for a while, he sighed deeply and said, "At that time, not only was Yao Yao blind, but I was also blind." Then, Gu Lao frowned and talked about the past of Gu Yao and her husband. Gu Yao's husband was called Xia Kaiji, and the two were college classmates. Xia Kaiji's family condition wasn't very good, but he was ambitious. When others were playing basketball and playing games, he was immersed in studying all day. This kind of man was a typical phoenix man, commonly known as a golden phoenix that flew out of a chicken coop. Phoenix man was not a derogatory term, but because their shortcomings and strengths were equally conspicuous, they slowly left a bad impression in people's hearts. Hard work, diligence, self-discipline, these were all advantages. Because they suffered too much when they were young, most of them were far more mature than their peers, and they hoped to change everything through their own efforts. Just like what a female star said, "I'm from a rich family myself." The worse the family situation, the more eager they were to change through their own efforts. This also led to a very complicated mentality, inferiority and conceit at the same time. Back then, Gu Yao had been captivated by Xia Kaiji's maturity, which far surpassed that of his peers. But this kind of confidence and maturity often turned into shrewdness. Gu Lao wasn't the kind of person who had secular prejudice, so naturally he didn't mind Xia Kaiji's poor birth, so after seeing Xia Kaiji a few times, the old man agreed to the relationship between the two. Xia Kaiji was indeed very hardworking. A few years after the two graduated, he became a senior executive in a large company, but with the gradual success of his career, some long-hidden problems gradually exposed. For Xia Kaiji, his career was always above everything. But for Gu Yao, family was the center of life. For this reason, the husband and wife, who were originally intimate, also had a gap. And with the birth of the twins, this gap was gradually widened. Gu Yao quit her job and stayed at home to take care of the child, but Xia Kaiji was nowhere to be seen all day. Finally, one day, Gu Yao had enough of living like a widow. So, after a big fight with Xia Kaiji, Gu Yao took the child and moved back to the old residence in Hohai. Perhaps it was because Xia Kaiji's career had indeed reached a critical juncture during that time, so he hadn't come to find Gu Yao. It was precisely because of this that the two of them had completely lost the chance to reconcile. By the time Xia Kaiji saw Gu Yao again, she was already lying quietly in the hospital morgue. He didn't even have time to look at Gu Yao before he was chased out by the furious Gu Lao. At this point, this unfortunate marriage had completely come to an end. The reason why Gu Lao scolded Xia Kaiji was because Xia Kaiji didn't take good care of Gu Yao, and because of the two children. After Gu Yao's death, Gu Lao felt that the responsibility was all on Xia Kaiji, so he firmly refused to let him raise the two children and refused to let Xia Kaiji see the children. After Xia Kaiji communicated with Gu Lao a few times, he had to let the old man do what he wanted because he didn't want to go to court with his father-in-law because of this matter. So, except for the living expenses that were sent to Gu Lao's account every month, Xia Kaiji completely disappeared from Gu Lao's sight. But the more it was like this, the angrier Gu Lao was. The reason why he didn't let Xia Kaiji see the children was that he wanted to embarrass Xia Kaiji a little as a punishment. But Xia Kaiji didn't even have the least sincerity. After being scolded by him a few times, he actually didn't come anymore. Little son of a bitch. Gu Lao cursed for the first time, and then he continued to hatefully, the two children are so cute. He doesn't want them as a father, but I, as a grandfather, want them. And he even wants to send living expenses every month. Bah! Does he think I care about his stinky money? A few days ago, the agent called me and asked if I was selling this old house in Hohai. He said this old house is worth a lot of money now. Tomorrow, I'll go to the police station and change the surname of the two children. In the future, they will follow my surname, Gu. The more Gu Lao spoke, the angrier he became. It made Xianxia, who started this topic, a little embarrassed. He really touched the pot that didn't boil. As a bystander, of course it wasn't good to comment on this kind of thing. So Xianxia wisely shut his mouth and let Gu Lao vent his dissatisfaction in his ears. Although Gu Lao's house was close to the tea house in a straight line, it still took about 10 minutes to walk over. Most of the houses in the neighborhood were Sihiyuan, and Gu Lao's house was naturally no exception. It was just that it wasn't a dignified two-entry Sihiyuan like the Qin family. We're here, Gu Lao complained all the way. When he really stood in front of the door, he seemed to have thought of something. He quickly turned his head and solemnly said to Xianxia, Little Chen, let me make it clear to you first. I can't make you happy with this kind of thing. Yao Yao's ghost may be inside. Are you sure you want to go in with me? Since we're already here, of course we have to go in and take a look. Not to mention there's a big sun above us. Even if there's a ghost, it's impossible for it to appear at this time, right? After saying that, Xianxia stretched out his hand and pointed at the sun in the sky. Gu Lao looked at his finger and was suddenly blinded by the sunlight. Okay, then let's hurry up. When we're done, we'll bring it to the tea house to eat. Seeing that the sun was shining, Gu Lao finally felt relieved. He then took out the key and opened the door of the Sihiyuan. Then, Gu Lao walked into the courtyard with Xianxia. For some reason, the moment Xianxia stepped into the courtyard, the sun in the sky suddenly dimmed a lot, as if a dark cloud just happened to float over and cover the sun. Gu Lao led Xianxia straight to the main hall, and then said to Xianxia, Sit anywhere you want, I'll go and pour you a cup of tea first. You're always the one who invites me to tea, this time it's finally my turn to invite you, Gu Lao said as he walked out of the main hall with a kettle. After he left, Xianxia looked at the table in the center of the main hall with interest. There were fruits and candles on the table, and next to it was a guanyin statue. If Xianxia guessed correctly, these tributes should be used by Gu Lao to worship Gu Yao. However, he didn't want the child to know that his mother had passed away, so he put a guanyin statue next to it. There was an armchair on both sides of the table. From beginning to end, Gu Lao didn't look at the person on the chair. But there was a person sitting there. A woman. The woman was wearing a set of very ordinary home clothes, sitting quietly on the old-fashioned wooden armchair. If one looked carefully, one would find that her skin was terrifyingly white as paper. It was estimated that even an albino was not as white as her. What was even more strange was that the woman's eyes were pitch black, as if ink had dripped into her eyes. Xianxia turned his head and glanced at the woman, nodded politely at her, and then smiled and greeted her. Chapter 332. Xianxia looked at the woman in the central room with a smile. It was actually a bit inaccurate to call her a woman. After all, Gu Yao had been dead for more than half a year, and her body had long decayed. How could she be considered a human now? She should be a female ghost. Xianxia nodded toward the chair, and after a polite greeting, the expression on the woman's face changed slightly. She looked no different from a real person. Although her eye sockets were dark and she didn't even have eyeballs, there was still a hint of surprise in her eyes. The woman stared straight at Xianxia. After a long while, She finally moved her lips slightly. Immediately afterward, the woman's voice suddenly sounded in Xianxi's mind. "Sugmi?" Hearing this, Xianxi couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. That was interesting. It turned out that not only did Gu Yao's soul not dissipate, but for some unknown reason, she also preserved some memories of her life while stabilizing her soul body. No wonder Gu Yao had been staying with the twins, but the twins acted as if nothing had happened. It was because Gu Yao was their biological mother, so even if she became a ghost, she would never hurt her children. Xianxi didn't answer Gu Yao's words. Instead, he stood in place and looked at her with interest. This kind of behavior was actually very impolite. Even animals had territorial consciousness, let alone ghosts. Therefore, after looking at Xianxi for a while, the darkness in Gu Yao's eye sockets became more and more intense. It was like boiling ink, as if it could splash out of the pot at any time. Sure enough. After a few breaths of time, Gu Yao slowly flew up from the chair in a very strange way, and then looked down at Xianxi condescendingly. If one looked carefully, they would find that Gu Yao's body was not very real. It was vaguely like a projection of a 3D holographic image. The candles in the central room were curled up with smoke. Perhaps because the lights in the room were not turned on, the originally kind Guan Yin statue seemed to be covered with a layer of shadow. It looked a bit ferocious and terrifying. Suddenly, a gust of chilly wind blew past, and the sound of leaves rustling could be heard from outside the house. The sky suddenly became a lot gloomier. It was dark and oppressive, as if a rainstorm could suddenly fall at any time. "I won't kill you," Gu Yao's voice sounded again. However, after Xianxi heard her words, he gently shook his head, and then thoughtfully turned to look outside the house. After a person dies, the 7 spirits disperse first. Then, the heaven soul returns to the heavens, the earth soul returns to the earth, and the life soul enters the cycle of reincarnation. Ghosts were formed from earthly souls, so they lacked heavenly souls and life souls. Naturally, they could not have complete personalities and thoughts like they did when they were alive. Therefore, if one wishes to deal with ghosts, one must first treat them as if they were mentally retarded. They were easily angered and irritated. At the same time, they were extremely aggressive. They would chop people up in the middle of the street if they didn't agree with them. Xianxi didn't seem to realize what he was dealing with. Therefore, the moment Xianxi turned around to look outside, Gu Yao was completely enraged by his actions and went completely berserk, accompanied by an ear-piercing scream that pierced the depths of one's soul. A strong wind suddenly blew in the central room. Gu Yao's facial expressions suddenly became particularly ferocious. Her head of black hair fluttered in the wind, and her pair of pupilless eyes were constantly oozing black blood. She was an evil ghost that had just crawled out of hell. However, Xianxi seemed to be unaware of anything and continued to look outside the house. Gu Yao had already issued a warning, but Xianxi was not moved at all. Therefore, Gu Yao completely turned into a vengeful ghost and fiercely pounced on Xianxi. Why would people be afraid of ghosts? It was because the two of them were not on the same level, and there was no way to fight back. An ordinary person holding a Guanyin bodhisattva from the night market, or chanting a few Amitabha, wanted to subdue an evil ghost with deep resentment. That was a plot that only existed in movies. Everything in the world had a spirit. From the moment Gu Yao turned into a ghost, she had already become a completely new life form. A life form that existed in the world in the form of energy, and was very fragile. Ghosts were more likely to come into contact with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth than humans, so ordinary people could not deal with ghost attacks at all. This was because they had no idea how the ghosts were attacking them. And if humans also came into contact with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and learned how to use it, then would ghosts still be a match for humans? It was like asking a mentally disabled person to fight with a normal person. How could the former win against the latter? Unless the latter was also mentally disabled. Xianxi was clearly not mentally disabled. Moreover, his understanding of the laws of heaven and earth was far beyond the imagination of ordinary immortal cultivators. Therefore, the moment Gu Yao pounced on Xianxi, it was as if she had crashed into a high-voltage electric net, and her entire body trembled violently. Perhaps because it was too painful, Gu Yao suddenly let out an ear-piercing scream, then suddenly turned into a cloud of gray smoke and flew back to the table in the central room at an even faster speed. Running? Seeing this, Xianxia smiled slightly, then took out the soul crystal and gently waved at the cloud of gray smoke. The gray smoke continued to churn and jump, as if it was still making its final struggle. But under the restraint of Xianxia's enormous true yuan, all efforts were futile. The soul crystal seemed to have turned into the purple-gold-red gourd of the golden-horned king. At Xianxia's command, the soul crystal directly sucked in Gu Yao's ghost. The cold wind came to an abrupt stop. The sun shone again, leaving a rectangular golden spot on the ground through the door frame. This central room, which was facing the south, suddenly became much more spacious and bright. Xianxia picked up the soul crystal and looked at it. There was a cloud of gray fog inside. And this was clearly Gu Yao's own soul. Xianxia played with the soul crystal in his hand. After a while, Gu Lao quickly walked back with a cup of tea. "Come, have a taste of my tea. I specially brought it from other places. After the rain, it's very precious." Gu Lao handed the teacup to Xianxia, then sat aside with a smile. Xianxia held the teacup and took a sip, then put on an intoxicated expression, and then praised very exaggeratedly, "Good. Good. You really have good taste. Okay? Try more. I prepared a few kilograms for you, you can take some back later." "How can I accept it? Why are you being so polite with me?" "Don't be polite. Just take it." Gu Lao waved his hand generously. But the old man didn't know. Not only did Xianxia take his tea leaves, but she also took his daughter away. Of course. The reason why Xianxia did this was not to hurt Gu Yao, but to help her. After all, the soul crystal was the most precious treasure in the world. Even Xianxia used the soul crystal to nourish his divine soul, so the benefits were needless to say. Ghosts were born after people died. Therefore, compared to people, ghosts were actually incomplete. Therefore, it wouldn't be long before they completely disappeared from this world. Chapter 333. Xianxia held a teacup and chatted with Gu Lao for a while. The old man seemed to have suddenly thought of something and quickly pulled him out of the main hall. "It's getting late, let's go, it's time to cook." Looking at his anxious look, it seemed that he really didn't want Xianxia to stay here any longer. Seeing this, Xianxia just smiled and didn't say anything. However, when he followed Gu Lao out of the central room and went to the kitchen, Xianxia suddenly stopped next to the large water tank in the yard, and then began to carefully look at the water tank in front of him. This kind of water tank was very common in Shangjing Sihiyuan, which was the big water tank in Sima Guang's story of smashing a tank. The large water tank in the yard, in addition to the role of water and fire prevention, was mainly for auspiciousness. The large tank was filled with water, and water made money, which meant that the family could prosper and accumulate wealth. These were old customs, and generally, only old people like Gu Lao would have this kind of thing in their house. Xianxia stood by the water tank for a while, and no one knew what he was looking at. Seeing that he didn't move, Gu Lao stood at the kitchen door and couldn't help but urge him again. "Little Chen? What are you doing? It's already 4 o'clock, let's start quickly." "Okay, I'm coming." After hearing Gu Lao's urging, Xianxia had to respond with a smile, and then followed Gu Lao into the kitchen. Since he wanted to taste Gu Lao's cooking, Gu Lao naturally had to cook dinner, and Xianxia would help him prepare the dishes. Gu Lao took care of a child alone, so his cooking skills naturally wouldn't be bad. In addition, he only made some common home-cooked dishes today, so it didn't take long for a table full of dishes to fill up. Because he wanted to bring all these dishes to the tea house, Gu Lao specially found a scooter for moving goods, put all the plates and chopsticks on the scooter, and was ready to drag the scooter to the tea house. Now that it was summer, the time for the sun to set was naturally much later than before. Therefore, when Xianxia dragged the scooter out of Gu Lao's house, it was only a little over 5 o'clock, and the bright sun was still hanging in the sky with no signs of setting. Maybe because nothing went wrong, after Gu Lao locked the door, the expression on his face became a lot more relaxed. It was obviously her own home, but she made it seem like she was in a haunted house. Even cooking a meal was frightening to her, so Xianxia smiled and joked, "You see, I'm fine, right? Gu Yao is not an evil person with grievances. Why would she turn into an evil spirit and demand lives? If she had a soul in heaven, I think she would only protect you and your child. So, you can rest assured." After hearing Xianxia's words, Gu Lao's face suddenly showed an expression of sudden realization. That's right, Yao Yao is such a kind person, how could she become a malicious spirit? I was being foolish. After figuring this out, Gu Lao's mood suddenly improved a lot. How about this? I'll invite your family of 3 to have a good meal at my house tomorrow, as a thank you for taking care of the 2 of them. What do you think? Okay, as long as you don't need to be a cook, I'm all for it. The 2 dragged the scooter, happily chatting as they walked back. Since the house began to be haunted, Gu Lao had not let anyone enter the house. This time, Xianxia jumped back and forth, and the old man could finally put down the big stone in his heart. Xianxia and Gu Lao dragged the scooter back to the tea house. As soon as the door of the tea house was pushed open, the 3 little ones rushed out of the children's playground. "Papa, what are we eating today?" the little one asked Xianxia with a shy face. Looking at the little one's cute greedy face, Xianxia couldn't help but reach out and pinch her little face, and then opened the food cover on the scooter. "Grandpa made you a Beijing dish. Do you like it?" "I like it. Grandpa's food is delicious." Before the little fellow could answer, the 2 brothers came over and chimed in. Then, the older brother came to the little one's side and said proudly, "Sister, let me tell you what this dish is." After that, he pointed to the dishes on the scooter and wanted to tell the name of the dish. But at this time, the little one suddenly stood in front of him, and then said very proudly, "You don't need to tell me. I know what this dish is. This is Beijing sauce shredded pork. This is crystal pork knuckle. And this is Malian meat. This is Fugui chicken." Xianxia's culinary skills were superb. Every day, she would cook different dishes for her. It could be said that this little thing had eaten all over the world, so a few classic Jingbang dishes were naturally not difficult for her. Maybe it was because he had overdone it today, so while the older brother and the little one were still thinking about the name of the dish, the younger brother was standing next to them, constantly swallowing saliva. Seeing this, Xianxia pinched the little one's little face, and then pushed the scooter into the tea house. "Well, you must be hungry. You go wash your hands first, and then we'll eat." "Okay. Wash my hands." "I'll wash my hands first, then I'll eat first." "You can't eat if you don't wash your hands." The little one reacted the fastest. As soon as she heard Xianxia say that she wanted to wash her hands, she turned around and ran to the kitchen. After seeing her movements, the 2 brothers immediately followed, and at the same time, they kept shouting, "I'll wash my hands first. I'll eat first." Looking at the 3 lively and cute children, Gu Lao was laughing so hard that he could not close his mouth. Even Qin Ruoying could not help but shake her head with a smile, and then she asked them to run slower so that they would not fall. For a moment, this small tea house was filled with laughter and cheers. It was not the first time that the 3 little ones had eaten together, but when they were eating, they were competing in different ways. Who could use chopsticks better? Who could eat more dishes? Who couldn't eat rice? Perhaps this was the advantage of having children together. Everything had to be compared, and under the intentional guidance of the parents, it became a healthy competition, which made them more obedient. While the 3 little guys were stuffing themselves with food, 3 A6 with Beijing plates suddenly stopped at the entrance of the tea house. Then, many people got out of the 3 cars. Among these people, there were men and women, and they dressed in completely different styles. Some of them were wearing loose sportswear, while others were wearing well-tailored suits. When they stood together, they didn't seem to match at all. Xiao Yuan was the head shopkeeper of the tea house, so she naturally knew how the tea house's business was. So when she saw so many people coming to the tea house, she could not help but frown, and whispered to Xianxia, "Boss, these people don't seem to be here to drink tea." Xianxia was busy wiping the oil stains on the little one's mouth. After hearing Xiao Yuan's words, he said without raising his head, "It's okay, there are a few acquaintances." as if to prove Xianxi's words. As soon as he finished speaking, a man in sportswear came to the door of the tea house, and then very politely knocked on the door. "Hello, Mr. Qin." Hearing this, Xianxi finally raised his head. After glancing at the people outside the tea house, the corners of his mouth curled up into a faint smile. Where was this place? This was Hohai, under the emperor's feet. Hohai was only a street away from Zongnanhai, and Zongnanhai was where Wuxia's luck was. The dragon vein of a country gathered here, so how could it be a place to breed evil spirits? Even if it was haunted, it had to be in a different place. No wonder Gu Yao's ghost did not dissipate, so. Chapter 334. For Xianxi, Zhonghai was a place full of memories and beautiful memories. But now, he chose to settle down in Shangjing instead of the familiar Zhonghai. One of the reasons was naturally because the spiritual energy in Shangjing was far superior to other places. One had to know that as the ancient capital of the 5 dynasties, Shangjing had always been the most important place in Wuxia. Zongnanhai was located in the center of Shangjing. It was the place where the dragon veins converged. It could be said to be a place of pure yang. Naturally, it was impossible to breed evil spirits and accept filth. Hohai was adjacent to Zongnanhai. After Gu Yao died in a car accident, her yin spirit did not dissipate. Instead, it became more and more stable and even began to condense into a soul body. This was obviously a very strange thing. Because of this, Xianxi speculated that this matter should be deliberately manipulated behind the scenes. And if he guessed correctly, this person should want to use the geographical advantage of Zongnanhai to organize Gu Yao's soul body and cultivate an extremely powerful yin servant. The yin servant did not have a physical body, so once the yin servant was formed, its combat power would naturally be far superior to cultivators of the same level and even stronger than Shikigami. But what kind of place was Zongnanhai? The Wu Lian's influence spread throughout the country, and there were countless experts under their command. How could there be a mistake here? Japanese? Inyang Liao? How could it be? If the Japanese could cultivate yin servants in Zongnanhai, what was the difference between that and riding on Wuxia's head and shitting? Therefore, even if Xianxi used her but to think, she knew that this matter was definitely related to Wu Lian. It was just a thief crying out to catch a thief, and a ghost crying out to catch a ghost. Moreover, this person's cultivation level was very high, and he had a high status in the Wu Lian. Otherwise, the Wu Lian would not allow him to do this in Zongnanhai. Xianxi's guess was correct. From the cars outside the tea house, it was not difficult to see that these A6 with military license plates were all Wu Lian cars. Xianxi didn't know who the leader was, so he didn't answer immediately. Seeing that he didn't seem to want to drive him away, the man immediately lowered his head and said politely, "Mr. Chen, my name is Ding Qingji, and I work for the General Supervision Office. The reason why I took the liberty to visit you today is because this is a very important matter, and I need to verify it with you. Can you do me a favor?" After saying that, Ding Qingji bowed slightly and made an inviting gesture. Looking at his neither servile nor overbearing attitude and full of confidence, Xianxi guessed that this person should be at least at the level of a sister-in-law. Director of the Supervision Office. He was the official in charge of Sijio City. This was getting interesting. A smile suddenly appeared on Xianxi's face. After glancing at Ding Qingji, he faintly said, "It's dinner time now. If you have anything to say, wait until I eat dinner first." Xianxi's attitude was so arrogant, but Ding Qingji's face did not show the slightest dissatisfaction. Instead, he chuckled and said, "It's my fault for disturbing you. Mr. Qin, please enjoy your meal. I'll wait for you outside." Ding Qingji looked at Xianxi with a smile, but Xianxi acted as if he didn't hear him. Even the little girl couldn't help glancing at him, and then looked at Xianxi with a confused face. "Open your mouth, good girl." Xianxi scooped up a bowl of rice with a spoon and sent it to the little girl's mouth. Hearing this, the little thing opened its mouth wide and swallowed the spoon in one gulp. As for Ding Qingji, who looked embarrassed, he pretended not to see it. Ding Qingji had no choice but to leave the tea house silently. No one knew what Ding Qingji said to the others outside, but after hearing what he said, they all went back to the cars. Xianxia was not an impolite person. The reason why he did that was to express his dissatisfaction. He was dissatisfied with Wu Lian. Because the two brothers liked to quarrel while eating, the meal took more than half an hour. Although Gu Lao was very curious about the relationship between Xianxia and the people outside, he knew what to ask and what not to ask, so he pretended not to see anything from beginning to end. After Qiao Yuan cleared the table, Xianxia looked at the clock on the wall meaningfully and then showed a meaningful smile. These people waited outside for so long, but his sister-in-law didn't call. Did she not receive the news? Or did she not inform her at all? Xianxia pondered as he slowly walked out of the tea house. After seeing him go out, Ding Qingji hurriedly got out of the car and then said politely to Xianxia, "Mr. Chen, you see, this is not the place to talk. Would you like to go to the office with us?" After saying that, Ding Qingji very subtly looked into the tea house, as if to say that there were ordinary people inside, so it was not convenient to talk about a lot of things here. Ding Qingji had made it very clear, but Xianxia had no intention of getting in the car with him. Instead, he said calmly, "If you have something to say it here. I don't have time to talk nonsense with you." As soon as Xianxia's voice fell, before Ding Qingji even had time to respond, a young man in a suit pushed open the car door, and then said to Xianxia provocatively, "Okay, then say it here." Xianxia glanced at the young man, ignored him, and looked at Ding Qingji. Seeing that something was wrong, Ding Qingji immediately lowered his voice and said to Xianxia, "Mr. Chen, this is Su Hongyi. His father is Su Feng, and he is a professor at the headquarters. He is in the same field as you." The Wu Lian was not a university, so naturally, there was no professor position. So what Ding Qingji meant was that Su Hongyi's father was in the same field as Xianxia. They were not Wu Lian people, but they were willing to do something for the Wu Lian, which was equivalent to a guest in ancient times. The so-called same field meant that this person's cultivation level was equivalent to Xianxia's. After listening to Ding Qingji's explanation, Xianxia couldn't help but laugh. How smart was he? Just based on Ding Qingji's words, he could analyze a lot of things. You couldn't just look at the surface of things. If you just looked at the surface, things were simple. Xianxia captured Gu Yao's ghost, but Gu Yao's ghost was a ghost servant that Su Feng put in Hohai to cultivate. So they came to the tea house with great fanfare just to ask Xianxia to return the ghost to them. But in fact, things weren't that simple. It even involved the thoughts of the Wu Lian's higher-ups. Xianxia and Su Feng were not Wu Lian people. They were only doing things for the Wu Lian for some reason. And what was Xianxia's level in the Wu Lian? Above divinity, X level. Su Feng was clearly at this level. How could someone at this level of cultivation be willing to be someone else's lackey? Because they weren't Wu Lian people, the Wu Lian people had always been wary of them. Xianxia had been waiting in the tea house for his sister-in-law's call, but the Wu Lian didn't let her call him. Which meant, the Wu Lian wanted them to solve this problem by themselves. How could they solve it? The two of them had the same status and the same cultivation level. Since the Wu Lian didn't want to be a peacemaker, it meant that the Wu Lian wanted them to fight because of this. It was a small matter, but it was important to save face. The Wu Lian would find an excuse to let the two of them compete. No matter who won, the Wu Lian wouldn't suffer any losses. On the contrary, they could use one of them to attack the other party's arrogance and warn them not to cause trouble. The Wu Lian had plenty of ways to deal with them. It had to be said that the Wu Lian's little abacus was indeed loud and clear. But the Wu Lian made a serious mistake, and that was, they didn't know Xianxia well enough. So even though the Wu Lian knew that this would make Xianxia unhappy, he still did it. Perhaps Xianxia's second aunt, who was loyal to the Wu Lian and extremely utilitarian, was one of the masterminds behind the scenes. Being a guest once wasn't enough. This time, he was being used as a tool. Xianxia didn't like this feeling. Therefore, after a long moment of silence, he opened his mouth and coldly said a sentence. And this sentence, it wasn't just for the young man, but also for Ding Qingji. Chapter 335. Scram. It was a simple word, but it accurately expressed all the thoughts in Xianxia's mind. He didn't even bother to look at Ding Qingji and Su Hongyi. After spitting out this word, he turned around and walked towards the tea house. Mr. Chen Yu, seeing this, Ding Qingji couldn't help but panic. Before he could even finish his sentence, the young man behind him was like an ignited barrel of dynamite. He was so angry that he jumped up and down in an instant. Stop right there. Perhaps because he was too agitated, Su Hongyi's attitude was really bad. After Ding Qingji turned around and glared at Su Hongyi finally realized who he was talking to, so he immediately restrained his temper. He then lowered his head slightly and said with some sincerity, "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, I was rude." Su Hongyi lowered his head and apologized, but Qinshi acted as if he didn't hear him. In the blink of an eye, he had already pushed open the tea house's door and was about to enter the house. Su Hongyi had no choice but to look at Qinshi's back and hurriedly said, "Sir, please wait. This is very important. The ghost that you took away was a Yin servant that my father carefully cultivated. He also said that if I can't find the Yin servant, then I don't have to go back. I respect you as a senior, but I hope that for the sake of my father and Wu Lian, you won't make things difficult for a junior like me." After saying this, Su Hongyi lowered his head and bowed respectfully to Qinshi. Qinshi finally stopped in his tracks. However, he didn't turn around. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and said to Ding Qingji, "The people from the inspector's office are guarding outside every day. Don't you know that Gu Yao is Gu Qinghe's daughter?" Of course we know this, but Gu Yao did die in an accident. You can verify this with old Master Gu. If that's the case, then do you know that Gu Qinghe is my friend? As soon as Qinshi's voice fell, Ding Qingji felt an invisible pressure suddenly attack him. It was as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water over his head. In this evening when the summer heat still lingered, he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. He only felt that his entire body was cold, and his hands and feet were ice cold. Ding Qingji finally understood what it meant to be imposing without being angry. After all, this person was above the celestial realm. But now that things had come to this, he could only bite the bullet and reply, "I know." After hearing his answer, Qinshi finally turned around. He first took a deep look at Ding Qingji before shifting his gaze to Su Hongyi. After that, Qinshi asked with a calm expression, "Gu Qinghe is my friend, but you used his daughter's soul to refine a Yin servant, so I'm puzzled. Who's the one who's not giving face?" Su Hongyi was stunned. But immediately after, he was like an actor in a Sichuan opera who changed his face. Just a moment ago, he was still very respectful, but now he suddenly changed his attitude and looked at Qinshi unscrupulously. His eyes were full of provocation. Su Hongyi looked at Qinshi unscrupulously. Qinshi looked at him calmly. After a long while, Su Hongyi asked with a provocative expression, "Sir, what you mean is, today's matter can't be settled peacefully?" Qinshi couldn't help but shake her head and laugh at this display of respect. A wild dog was a wild dog after all. Even if he deliberately pretended to be submissive, it wouldn't be long before he began to bare his teeth again. Since Su Feng was above the celestial realm, he must not be young, but this Su Hongyi looked to be in his early 20s. So Qinshi was very curious. Was Su Hongyi Su Feng's biological son? They were all the second generation of officials and rich people, but this one was the second generation of immortals? Nian Nian was also a second generation, but why didn't he see her so evil and wild? It was not a problem of family upbringing. Just like the joke circulating on the internet, when Nian Nian became an adult, Qinshi would tell her, "Nian Nian, in fact, your parents are immortal cultivators. In order to train you, we put you among ordinary people, hoping that you can grow up healthily and happily like ordinary people. Now that you have finally grown up, in addition to telling you the truth, Mom and Dad will also teach you the most powerful cultivation technique in the immortal cultivation world. Nian Nian, remember, from today onwards, you are the #1 second generation of immortals in the world." At the thought that Nian Nian might become silly due to extreme shock, the corners of Qinshi's mouth couldn't help but curl up into a faint smile. After all, for a man like Qinshi who played the role of a father, no matter how old his daughter was, she would always be as lively and cute as she was today. The more Qinshi thought about it, the more Su Hongyi was still thinking about how to provoke Qinshi and at the same time, let himself escape unscathed. This was Su Feng's test for Su Hongyi. He had to control the degree of infuriating Xianxia, but not make Xianxia lose his mind and accidentally kill him. For Su Hongyi, this was a kind of test, but at the same time, it was also a kind of training. Being able to face the anger of a celestial being would be of great help to his future cultivation. Everyone present had their own ideas. However, Xianxia's next reaction was completely out of Su Hongyi's expectations. It was like basking in the sun in Hohai for the whole day, and now that the sun was about to set, it was naturally time to go home. Therefore, after looking up at the sun that was about to set, Xianxia yawned lazily, then turned and walked to the tea house. This time, Ding Qingji and Su Hongyi were both stunned. In the face of Su Hongyi's provocative words, Xianxia actually did not have any reaction. Where was the dignity of a celestial being? Where was the principle that a grandmaster should not be humiliated? Couldn't he act according to common sense? Was the script wrong? Seeing that Xianxia had already pushed open the door of the tea house, Su Hongyi finally came back to his senses and hurriedly shouted, "Mr. Chen, my father said that if you don't hand over the inn servant today, then the grudge is set. He will definitely pay you a visit in person another day." Pay you a visit? Xianxia stopped in his tracks again. After softly repeating this word, he tilted his head slightly and said with a calm expression, "He doesn't deserve it." After saying that, Xianxia's last bit of patience was exhausted, so he walked into the tea house without looking back. The door gently closed. Su Hongyi stood in place with a gloomy expression. After a long while, he finally spat on the ground and said coldly to Ding Qingji, "Director Ding, as you can see, it's not that we're looking for trouble, it's him who doesn't know what's going on." As he spoke, Su Hongyi waved at the car beside him. Then, someone quickly stepped forward and handed a letter to Su Hongyi. "This is a letter of challenge. Please pass it on to him." Ding Qingji took the letter of challenge, then frowned and advised, "I think this is a little inappropriate. Why don't you go back and talk to Mr. Su first? Otherwise, I can't explain it to the headquarters." Before Ding Qingji could finish, Su Hongyi waved his hand and interrupted him, then said righteously, "Director Ding, there's no need to say more. This is a private matter and has nothing to do with Wu Lian. Moreover, this Chun guy was rude first. How can my father just let it go like this?" Speaking of this, Su Hongyi suddenly turned his head and deliberately shouted in the direction of the tea house. "Su Feng declares, Mr. Su was rude first. Today, I'm here to ask for forgiveness. This is well known to all Le Bouchel. If Mr. Su dares to accept the challenge, we'll be waiting for you at the peak of Taihang in 3 days. Think carefully, don't regret it." Chapter 336. As soon as the words, "life and death duel," came out of Su Hongyi's mouth, it was as if he had been injected with chicken blood. His face instantly became much rosier. Based on his reaction, it was not difficult to see that he was very excited. His blood was boiling, and he was inexplicably excited. In fact, this matter was not that big of a deal, because Qin Xueqing's family was the backbone of the Wu Lian people. Mr. Chen's name had long been known throughout the Wu Lian people. The Wu Lian people were respected by martial arts. Su Feng, who was also above the heavenly man level, was naturally eager to prove his strength. Mr. Chen naturally became Su Feng's best choice. As long as he defeated Xianxia in public, Su Feng's status in the Wu Lian people would naturally skyrocket. He could even leap to become a giant who had the right to speak within the Wu Lian people. As the saying went, in a mediocre life, fame and fortune were just worldly possessions. But since ancient times, how many people could be exempt from this custom? Su Feng had descendants and apprentices. Even if it was not for himself, he had to think about his apprentices and apprentices. He had to leave his own legacy in Wuxia. But Xianxia and Su Feng were different. In this world, there were only a few people that Xianxia really cared about. He was like a wanderer wandering between two worlds. Wherever there was a home, that was where he belonged. Yingying and Yanyan were on Earth, so Earth was his home. As for his legacy, wasn't Yanyan his legacy? It was enough to have such a well-behaved, smart and sensible daughter. Old Gu was just an ordinary person. In addition, he was old, so it was normal for him to have blurred vision. Therefore, the old man did not hear Su Hongyi shout. But just by looking at Su Hongyi's posture, old Gu knew that this junior was not saying anything good. Therefore, when Qin returned to the tea house and sat down, old Gu could not wait to ask, "Little Qin, who is that outside?" "He's a former colleague of the company. Now that the company's performance is not good, the board of directors wants to invite me back, so they sent him to persuade me." "Lobbyist?" Hearing this, Gu Lao frowned and looked out the window. Then he asked doubtfully, "But from the way I see it, he doesn't look like he's here to be a lobbyist. He looks like he's here to cause trouble? That's normal. If I go back, won't he have another competitor for no reason? Of course he doesn't want me to go back." After hearing Qin words, Gu Lao's face suddenly showed an expression of realization. Then he nodded and said, "That's true. I see that you are doing well as the owner of a small tea house, so it's better not to go back. It will be troublesome." "You're right." Chen Shi and Gu Lao were chatting in the tea house. Outside the house. After Su Hongyi shouted, he stood still and waited for Chen Shi's reply. However, Chen Shi did not give any response. After a full 10 minutes, Ding Qingji finally couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Young Master Su, you see, Mr. Qin hasn't given a definite answer. This matter, why don't we just leave it at that?" Hearing this, Su Hongyi suddenly let out a sneer, then immediately shouted at the tea house again, "Mr. Qin, I have delivered your message, and the letter of challenge has also been handed over to Director Ding to notarize. My father will be waiting for you at the peak of Taihang in 3 days. This battle will be watched by the world. I hope you won't miss the appointment, so as not to become a laughingstock. You're the most elegant person in Wuxia, so I'm sure you won't back down. If that's the case, I'll take my leave first." After that, Su Hongyi bowed to the tea house, then got in the car and left. From beginning to end, She did not give any response. However, after hearing Su Hongyi's last sentence, She couldn't help but sneer. He was being ridden on top of his head. The early summer night didn't have the irritability of the day, and the sudden breeze even seeped in a slight chill. The smog in Shangjing had always been very serious, but today, it sprinkled a little bit of starlight for the first time. After the little girl finished washing up, she lay on the windowsill and looked at the stars for a while, then played with Big Head for a while. Only then did she reluctantly climb into bed under She's repeated requests. According to the usual rhythm, She would tell her 1 or 2 short stories, and then this little thing would fall into a deep sleep. But today, for some reason, after she told her 2 short bedtime stories, this little thing was still very energetic, and kept crawling on Shi and Run. Shi had no choice but to hold her in his arms, and then gently persuade her, "Nyin, be good, it's already 12 o'clock, you should rest early and have enough energy to play tomorrow, okay?" Hearing this little thing pouted and said coquettishly, "I don't want to sleep. Then what do you want to do?" "I don't know." The little thing shook her head blankly. But then, as if she suddenly thought of something, she quickly turned her head to the end of the bed and shouted, "Big Cat! Big Cat, come here." Big Cat was lying in the corner with its eyes closed, and after hearing the little thing's shout, it quickly jumped onto the bed. Meow! Just as Big Cat meowed, the little thing hugged it in her arms, and then put it on the pillow next to her. "Big Cat, it's cold outside. Don't run outside, sleep with me. I'll cover you with a quilt." As she spoke, the little thing grabbed the cold quilt, and then, like Qin Ring, gently covered the Big Cat with the quilt. Meow! Big Cat lay on the bed and looked at the little thing with a confused expression. After this period of cultivation, it had reached the peak of wisdom, and could break through at any time, so even She did not force it to play with the little thing recently. But today, this little thing did not know what was wrong with it. In the middle of the night, instead of sleeping, it came to ask it to sleep. Did it still need to sleep? Big Cat was wondering if it should escape, but after the little thing covered it with the quilt, she gently put her little hand on it, and then imitated Qin Ruoying's tone and said, "Big Cat, be good, you're the youngest, I want to take care of you, when you fall asleep I'll sleep." These were the words Qin Ruoying usually said to her. Who would have thought that this little thing would actually apply what she learned? So, she had learned to care for others now? This was a good thing, so naturally he would encourage her. Therefore, after Xianxia glared fiercely at the big cat, it reluctantly closed its eyes, curled up into a ball next to the little thing, and pretended to be asleep. The little thing waited for a while, and when she thought that it was really asleep, she carefully covered the big cat with the quilt, and then obediently lay back on the bed. "I'm going to sleep." Perhaps because she had experienced the joy of taking care of others, the little thing lowered her voice and said such a sentence, and was no longer naughty, but obediently closed her eyes and fell asleep. Looking at her very loving action, the couple's faces could not help but evoke a trace of a smile. It was only after the little fellow had truly fallen asleep that the day was truly over. And at this time, Qin looked at Xianxia and asked softly, "Today's matter, what do you think?" Obviously, she also heard Su Hongyi's words. Qin was very clear about Xianxia's strength, and naturally, she was not worried about Xianxia's safety, so she was just casually asking. Anyway, no matter what decision Xianxia made, she would support it. "I heard that the scenery at the top of Taihang Mountain is not bad. Why don't we take Nian there to see the scenery?" "I think that's a good idea." "Then it's settled." "Okay." In a few words, the couple settled this matter, and then began to discuss how to arrange the itinerary. As for Su Feng's challenge, Chapter 337. Going north to the Taihang Mountains, how difficult is it? Sheep intestines are twisted, the wheels are destroyed. How bleak are the trees, the north wind is mournful. Cao Cao's poem, Journey of the Bitter Cold, described the magnificence of the Taihang Mountains. The Taihang Mountains started north from Shangjing and extended south to Jinzhou. The 800 miles of Taihang spanned across 4 provinces. Could be said to be vast and majestic. Because of the direction of the mountains, the Taihang Mountains were higher in the north and higher in the south. The peaks were mainly concentrated in Jizhou, not far from Shangjing. It was also because of the towering peaks in the north of Taihang that it formed a completely different landscape from the south. In the depths of the mountains, one could see cliffs that looked like they were carved by knives and axes, deep and narrow canyons, and winding rivers. The road wound up the steep cliffs, going round and gradually disappeared into the clouds. Looking down through the car window, one could see the erratic clouds in the mountains and the lush greenery that even the fog couldn't cover. Layers of green forest, enchanting wilderness. The little girl didn't like to sit in a car because it always gave her a feeling of suffocation. Therefore, compared to a car, the little girl preferred to sit in a bus. After all, the bus was spacious and had a wide view. Sitting in the bus, one could see the beautiful scenery of the mountains. Today, they were hiking, so Qin gave the little girl a set of children's sports clothes. Her hair was tied up in a bun, revealing a round and rosy little face. She looked particularly lively and cute. Click, click, click. The little girl sat on Qin lap and took pictures with her mobile phone. But she didn't have a sense of beauty, so she just took pictures for fun. As long as she heard the click-click sound of the phone, the little girl couldn't help but giggle. Come to think of it, only a child's laughter could be so innocent and crisp. She came out to play for fun. And her laughter seemed to have a strange magic that could infect the people around her. As long as he heard her crisp laughter, he would feel like he had really escaped from the city, put aside his work and worries, and enjoyed life with a natural state of mind. Therefore, even though this little thing kept on making noises throughout the journey, the other passengers in the carriage didn't find her too noisy. Instead, they would turn back to look at the couple from time to time. They didn't hide the envy in their hearts at all and kept on praising this child for being so cute. It was May 24th, Wednesday. It was an ordinary Wednesday. Because it was a working day, at least 1/3 of the seats on the bus were empty. The Taihang Mountains were very long. Basically, every province had its own scenic spots. The scenic spot where Xianxia's family was now was the one with the highest elevation among the many scenic spots, Zaiwudai Mountain Scenic Spot. Originally, they wanted to go to the highest east stage to see the scenery. However, when they came here, They heard from the management staff of the scenic spot that because of the heavy rain a few days ago, there were mudslides and landslides on the road to the east stage. Therefore, the east stage was temporarily closed. With no other choice, Xianxia and his family could only depart from the Red Cliff Castle and follow the winding mountain path to the North Terrace, which was slightly lower than the East Terrace. They planned to camp in the North Terrace for the night before returning home. They were traveling, so naturally, they couldn't be in a hurry. The Zuodai Mountain was very steep. It had always been called the novice training camp for mountaineers. After setting off from the Scarlet Cliff Castle, Xianxia let the little girl sit on his shoulders, and then he held Qin Ruing's hand, and the family of three leisurely strolled through the lush green peaks. They walked slowly. At this speed, it would take at least 4 or 5 hours to climb the North Terrace. When Xianxia finally climbed over a mountain, the view suddenly became much wider. The little girl rode on his shoulder and looked around. She couldn't help but shout excitedly, "Papa! I like it here!" Blue sky, white clouds, green mountains, green water, and golden lotus flowers all over the mountains. In front of the beautiful scenery, even an ignorant child like her couldn't help but be intoxicated. And just when the little girl was excited by the beautiful scenery in front of her, East Terrace, the peak of Taihang. The Taihang Mountains in the north were very steep. The development value was far less than the 3 mountains and 5 peaks, so there were basically no buildings on the mountain. Therefore, the most original natural scenery was maintained. After climbing over the mountain and climbing to the top, looking back at the bleak place, the clouds were thousands of miles away, the mountains were thousands of layers, the sun was shining, and everything was shining. A sense of heroism rose in the chest. It was worth the trip. Unfortunately, the road to the East Terrace had been temporarily closed. This beautiful scenery was destined to not be with Xianxia's family. Although the path up the mountain had been sealed, the peak of Taihang was currently filled with people and bustling with noise and excitement. These people were naturally not hikers who came to enjoy the scenery. As early as 3 days ago, when Su Hongyi loudly read the letter of challenge outside the tea house, the whole Wuxia was shocked. For such big news, with the usual attitude of the Wu Lian, he would definitely order a ban on it. Maintaining stability, everyone was used to it. But this time was different. The Wu Lian had no intention of blocking the news at all. Instead, he allowed it to spread throughout the country in a very short time, and even the whole world. That night, countless people couldn't sleep. Even more people rushed to Taihang Mountain overnight, wanting to be the first to occupy the best viewing position in the East Terrace, hoping to see the upcoming battle with their own eyes. If they could get some inspiration from it, how would it help their future cultivation? This battle involved 2 celestial beings. One was Mr. Chen, who rose like a comet and was directly rated X by the Wu Lian. The other was Su Feng, the leader of the Yin Ghost sect who had been in charge of the Southwest for hundreds of years. Celestial beings. A battle of life and death. What kind of grand event was this? Because Mr. Chen was too mysterious, no one knew who would win this battle. To be honest, if it weren't for the unreliable rumors that spread from time to time within the Wu Lian, no one was optimistic about Mr. Chen's victory. But he lived up to his reputation. Since the Wu Lian admired Mr. Chen so much, there must be something special about him, and his strength should not be underestimated. Therefore, this battle could be said to be the focus of the world's attention. There was an open space at the highest point of the East Terrace, with an area of about 10 square meters, which could be regarded as an excellent viewing platform. Those who came to watch the battle were not ordinary people, but they all tacitly stood at the mountainside, at least 100 meters away from the viewing platform. No one dared to take a step forward. No one dared to talk about it. Except for the sound of the wind, not even the sound of birds or insects could be heard. It was silent. All this was because there was one person sitting on the viewing platform. He would climb to the top and look down on all the other mountains. Facing this magnificent and beautiful scenery of the mountain peak, this person closed his eyes tightly and sat upright like a rock on the observation platform. He didn't move at all. But there was an incomparably strong force that kept flowing out of him, like a dark cloud on a cloudy day, weighing heavily on everyone's hearts. Finally, someone couldn't bear the pressure. After retreating a few hundred meters, he let out a long sigh of relief. Looking at the mountaintop, he couldn't help but sigh. Heavenly man, Senior Su has really reached the realm of oneness of heaven and men. Senior Su has been sitting here for 3 days, but Mr. Chen hasn't shown up. Do you think, is he arrogant, or he doesn't dare to come at all? In a battle between heavenly man and heavenly man, victory and defeat is only a hair's breadth away. The most important thing in a war is the right time, the right place, and the right people. Mr. Su has been sitting here for 3 days, and he has already familiarized himself with the surroundings. If Mr. Chen is going to fight, he should have come here in advance to familiarize himself with the place. The sun is about to set. Why hasn't he shown up yet? Could it be, he really doesn't dare to come? A few peak strength warriors hid on the mountainside and whispered to each other. Su Feng's letter of challenge didn't mention a specific time for the final battle, so according to tradition, as long as the sun hadn't set, the day was not over yet. If Mr. Chen still didn't show up when the sun went down, it could be assumed that he had admitted defeat. Mr. Chen is at least above the heavenly man level. I don't think he will run away before the battle, right? Otherwise, wouldn't it be a joke to be above the heavenly man level? He shouldn't run away before the battle. Maybe Mr. Chen is delayed by something. Let's wait a little longer. Anyway, there's still some time before the sun goes down. Maybe he's already on his way. Chapter 338. Why hadn't Mr. Chen come yet? This question had become a common question in everyone's heart. Did he not dare to come? Or did he not want to come? Although this was the guess in everyone's heart, no one could give an accurate answer. Someone once said that the dignity of a celestial being was more important than life. And the so-called dignity did not simply refer to face. How much was face worth? What was really important? It was the determination to push a cultivator forward. From the moment they stepped on the path of cultivation, they were destined to compete with the heavens, with the earth, and with all living things. Even if the road ahead was difficult and dangerous, they had to cut through all obstacles and press forward. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. Only by fighting for that slim chance of survival could one shed mortality and become an immortal and live freely in the world. This battle was the focus of the world's attention, and for Su Feng, it was a matter of life and death. How could he just laugh it off? Therefore, as early as 3 days ago, Su Feng had already arrived at the peak of Taiheng. Then he meditated here for 3 days, adjusting his state to the peak. Such a move not only expressed the importance he attached to this battle, but it was also a necessary tactic. The reason why Su Feng meditated here for 3 days was not because he was bored, but because he wanted his essence, energy, and spirit to be closely connected with the mountains and rivers. 3 days was enough for him to familiarize himself with the direction of every mountain peak here, the position of every tree, and even the size of every fallen rock, every flower, every leaf, every world, every blade of grass, every tree, and every bodhi. Sitting on the right time and place, Su Feng's momentum reached its peak. Before they even fought, he had already taken the lead and gained the upper hand. This was not cheating. After all, Su Feng came here after issuing the letter of challenge. Mr. Chen could do the same. The sun rose and set and rose. The whole place was silent. Only the mountain wind kept echoing. Everyone was silently waiting for that person's arrival. Finally, the sun turned to the west. It was still emitting thousands of rays of golden light, but at the same time, it was also slowly falling. The clouds next to it were dyed rose, mixed with some gold, and looked particularly beautiful and spectacular. This was a beautiful scene that belonged to the sunset. It was different from the relaxed joy of sunrise. At sunset, people seemed to be more prone to sadness. The whole world seemed to fall into darkness at any time. The day was about to end, but Mr. Chen still did not show up. Where is it? Could it be that he really didn't dare to come? Finally, Su Feng opened his eyes and silently gazed at the setting sun on the horizon. At this moment, no one knew what he was thinking. Where was Mr. Chen? Then a blue light suddenly rose. Like a meteor, it flashed over the little fellow's head, and then left a long shadow in the sky. Meteor! Meteor! I know! It's a meteor! The little fellow jumped up and down excitedly. Her clear and melodious voice reverberated throughout the valley, like a cheerful bird flying freely under the boundless sky, at the same time. East Stage. The peak of Taihang. In fact, the sun had already set. But because of the refraction of the clouds, the afterglow of the setting sun could still be seen on the mountain, giving people the illusion that the sun had not set yet. Mr. Chen did not come after all. Even if people did not want to believe it, it was the truth. He was afraid of the battle. Many people came to watch the battle with a pilgrimage mentality, but they did not expect to see such a result in the end. This was something no one had expected. From today onwards, Mr. Chen's name would become Wuxia's biggest joke. After everyone shook their heads and sighed, they finally walked down the mountain in low spirits. Only a few people were still standing in the same place, unwilling to leave. Su Hongyi stood on a large rock closest to the observation deck. When he saw the sun sink into the mountaintop, he couldn't help but smile. From this moment on, everything was different from before. Identity, status, power, as long as he, Su Hongyi, wanted it. How could he not get it? This was the real. He would climb to the top and look down on all mountains. If Su Feng was not still sitting on the observation deck, Su Hongyi would have looked up to the sky and screamed to express his excitement at the moment. Su Hongyi's excitement did not last long, because there was a sudden exclamation from the crowd behind him. What is that? It looks like a meteor. Bah, no. It's a sword. A flying sword. It's so fast, it's coming, it's coming. The green light was so fast that it arrived in the blink of an eye. Like a meteor, it approached the east stage in an instant. Su Hongyi stared at the green light in a daze, and the smile on his face froze instantly. He's coming. Just as the sun was about to set and night was about to fall, a ray of green light streaked across the sky and shot straight to the peak of Taihang. Chapter 339. The sun had already set. Just when everyone thought that Mr. Chen was not going to show up, a green light suddenly pierced through the sky, leaped over the mountains, and headed straight for the east platform from the northwest. The green light shone like a comet. But when the green light approached the peak of Taihang, people suddenly realized, this was not a shooting star, this was a flying sword that only existed in legends. At the peak of the mountains, a sword soared to the heavens. Swoosh, swoosh, a green rainbow pierced the sky. The long sword turned into a green light and suddenly flew over from afar. Although it was not close, it vaguely gave people a huge pressure. Its momentum was so strong that it was unstoppable. The sword was 3 feet and 3 inches long, the blade was like water, and it emitted a dense chill. It was as cold as the moonlight and as bone-chilling as a cold lake. This long sword was the magic weapon that Xianxia had snatched from Bai Hong's hand, Flowing Cloud. Because the long sword was flying too fast, before anyone could react, the long sword had already arrived at the peak of Taihang, and the tip of the sword was pointed straight at Su Feng, who was sitting on the observation platform. Good timing! Seeing this, Su Feng let out a long howl to the sky. Then, like a giant python that had been dormant for a long time, he suddenly soared into the sky. His black robe fluttered in the wind, and for a moment he was like a god descending to earth, facing the flying sword in the sky. However, when Su Feng soared into the sky and was ready to face the sword, he truly felt the majestic power contained in the sword. Under the sky that was not late at dusk, twilight gradually rose, and the mountain wind raged. The sword seemed to have torn the sky apart, leaving a shallow mark in the void. Wherever the long sword went, the spiritual energy at the peak of Taihang surged toward it. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth kept converging into the sword, but it gradually increased the power of the sword. In the end, this power made Su Feng feel like he was in a trance, as if he was not facing the sword, but the entire sky, the sky, had collapsed. The power of this sword was so terrifying. Su Feng's face turned cold. He did not have time to think about where this flying sword came from, and he instinctively stirred up the vitality in his body. With a loud shout, 8 inn servants immediately appeared beside him and formed a protective circle around him. The 8 inn servants took up the position of the 8 trigrams, each occupying a corner. At the same time, they continued to inject their own yin qi into Su Feng's body. In that instant, with Su Feng as the center, a shadow of the 8 trigrams suddenly appeared at the peak of Taiheng, facing the green light from afar. That was because the flying sword suddenly stopped in the air after breaking the Taiji diagram. The blue light around the long sword had already dissipated. If it weren't for the fact that it was still floating quietly in the air, it wouldn't have looked much different from an ordinary long sword. However, although there were no visible wounds on Su Feng's body, most of his primordial qi had been shaken away. Like an old man whose body had been hollowed out, Su Feng stared blankly at this long sword that was right in front of him. He actually couldn't maintain his high void wind resistant state, falling straight down from the sky just like that. Bang! With a muffled sound, Su Feng crashed heavily into the ground. But right after that, he crawled up from the ground shakily. Su Feng half knelt on the ground, trying to raise his head. In addition to shock, fear, there was also some disbelief in his eyes. One sword. Only one sword. He couldn't even take one sword from Mr. Qin? From beginning to end, Mr. Qin had never shown his face. With only one flying sword, he had cut off half of his cultivation and completely turned him into a cripple. Su Feng stared blankly at the flying sword in the sky. Suddenly, the sword vibrated slightly. After seeing this scene, Su Feng suddenly felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The expression on his face suddenly became extremely nervous and frightened. So, after a shudder, Su Feng suddenly lay on the ground, his forehead pressed against the soil, and shouted in a trembling voice, "Thank you, Mr. Qin, for sparing my life. Thank you, Mr. Qin, for sparing my life. Thank you, Mr. Qin, for sparing my life." After Su Feng shouted 3 times, he even raised his head and kowtowed heavily on the ground 3 times. When the few martial artists who were not affected by the blast saw this scene, they were immediately dumbfounded. Even their eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. What happened just now? Su Tianren lost? And he was so scared that he knelt down and begged for mercy? This, after being stunned for a moment, a smarter guy suddenly came back to his senses and couldn't help but shout excitedly, "I understand. The reason why Xianxia only attacked after the sun went down, that's because he didn't take Su Tianren seriously at all. Su Feng doesn't deserve to fight with him at all." Hearing this, the rest of the people suddenly had a look of realization and hurriedly nodded in agreement. Yes, that's it. But what I don't understand is, Su Tianren is also above the celestial being level, but he couldn't even take one sword from Mr. Qin. Then, what realm should Mr. Qin be in? No one could answer this question. Everyone looked at the sky again. After Su Feng kowtowed 3 times, the sword turned into a green light again and flew back along the way it came. In the blink of an eye, it completely disappeared into the horizon. The mountain wind was still whistling. But in the blink of an eye, the peak of Taiheng had completely changed. The sightseer is looking at you from upstairs. The moon adorns thy windows, you decorate other people's dreams. And you are my dream. When the family of 3 returned to Scarlet Cliff Castle and got on the bus again, it was already 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The short trip to Taiheng ended in such a joyful atmosphere. Although the little fellow still wanted to continue, when she thought of the 2 brothers who were still waiting for her in the tea house, she couldn't wait to fly back to Xianxia. Because she could show off in front of them again. This little fellow was still young, but she especially enjoyed the feeling of being envied. And the 2 brothers gave in to her, so every time she showed off, even if they weren't interested, they would try their best to look extremely envious. Thinking about it, it was quite difficult for the 2 of them, in the past, when Auntie Zhang took care of Nyin Yin, the child was a careful and cautious mimosa. Now that she had been with her parents for a long time, the mimosa had become a little daisy commonly seen on the roadside. Lively and cute, she wasn't weak and delicate like the precious flowers. Xianxia was very satisfied with this. The bus soon arrived at Xianxia. As soon as they walked out of the bus station, Xianxia took the little fellow to the parking lot. Before he could reach out to call a taxi, two girls in their early 20s suddenly ran in front of him and excitedly pointed at the little fellow and said, "Hello, is this your daughter?" The two girls were quite good-looking. Big eyes, sharp chins, and high noses. They were the most popular faces on the internet. The two of them wore sports vests that exposed their navel and a pair of tight-fitting sports pants, which perfectly displayed the advantages of their figures. Yes, what's the matter?" Xianxia had always been very polite to ordinary people, so he simply nodded. "Brother, it's like this. We saw that your daughter is so cute, so we want to ask her to take a short video with us. Just 15 seconds, is that okay?" Short video? The waves of the internet came one after another, so old antiques like Xianxia were naturally eliminated a long time ago. However, when Qin Ruoying heard the little girl mention the three words, short video, she couldn't help but smile and explain, they should be talking about TikTok. "Oh, yes, TikTok." Seeing that Qin Ruoying seemed to have some understanding of this, the little girl quickly took out her phone and showed her homepage to Xianxia. She also specifically pointed at her number of fans, which was more than 400,000, which was quite good. "We want to dance a gray dance with our sister. Look, it's this video. There are only 2 or 3 movements, it's very simple." Xianxia looked at it and found that it was indeed very simple. He looked down at the little fellow and asked, "Nyanyan, sister wants to dance with you, are you willing?" Hearing this, the little fellow seemed to be a little shy. She quickly hid half of her body behind Xianxia. After she felt that she was safe, she poked her head out and glanced at the phone screen that the little girl handed over. "Sister, don't be afraid. Look, it's just a few movements. You only need to do it once with us." The little fellow shrunk behind Xianxia timidly. She seemed to be a little unwilling. However, Xianxia knew the little fellow's character very well. It was not an exaggeration to say that this little fellow only needed to blink her eyes and he already knew what she was thinking. With her current reaction, it was not that she did not want to, but she did not dare. Seeing that there were people coming and going at the station, the little fellow would more or less be a little shy. In this case, Xianxia, as a father, naturally had to encourage her more. Just play for fun, treat it as entertainment, and train her courage at the same time. It was a good thing. Therefore, Xianxia squatted beside the little fellow and persuaded her for a while. Father's words were always useful, so after hesitating for a while, the little fellow mustered up her courage and nodded. Then she walked out timidly. The movements were indeed very simple. It took a total of 15 seconds. Excluding the head and the tail, it probably took less than 10 seconds to actually jump up. Therefore, after the two girls demonstrated it in slow motion, the little fellow remembered most of it. Although she remembered the movements, she did not immediately start. Instead, she pouted and said to Xianxia, "Papa, you dance first. I'll dance after you." "I'll dance?" Xianxia looked at the little fellow helplessly, but when he saw her serious face, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying not only did not help Xianxia, but also added fuel to the fire. "Just dance for her to see. If you don't dance, how would she dare to dance?" Chapter 342. Life was back on track again. It was so peaceful that not a single ripple could be felt. The only thing that made Xianxia feel a little uncomfortable was, the little girl was addicted to the phone after all. Since the last short video, the little thing wanted to play with it from time to time. Although the brothers were not naughty, they were definitely the most enthusiastic audience. They would always give the warmest applause to the little girl at the end of her performance. In the long run, It also indirectly encouraged the little girl's self-confidence, which led to her clamoring to play music on the phone at all times. Xianxia had always been reluctant to let the little girl touch the phone, but he could not resist her reasonable request. Dancing was a good thing after all, so naturally, he could only let her be. To be on the safe side, Qin Ruing also specifically deleted most of the software on the phone, leaving only the system's music player. But how smart were the children nowadays? When Qin Ruing put the phone aside to play music for the little girl, the brothers could not help but fiddle with it. After all, they had been yearning for magical toys like the phone for a long time. Therefore, even if Qin Ruing had made enough precautions, she still could not stop the brothers from fiddling with it. It did not matter if they were young and illiterate. Anyway, they would always find something new. Therefore, the door to a new world was poked open by them one by one. Aunt Zhang and Gu Lao's years of suppression were finally released. For children, how fun were games? Just one look at the picture and the brothers were completely fascinated. Under the leadership of these two bad friends, the little girl was no longer naughty and became addicted to playing games on the phone. When Xianxia found out and wanted to stop her, she started crying and throwing a tantrum on the spot, refusing to put down the phone in her hand. The phone is fun. I want to play with the phone. I don't want toys. I want to play with the phone. This time, Xianxia was at his wit's end. Pandora's box had been opened, and it was basically impossible to close it again unless their memories of this period were erased. But Nian was his daughter after all, and the child was still so young. How could Xianxia bear to use magic to forcibly erase her memory? What's more, it was already the era of the mobile internet. Mobile phones had become a necessity in life. No matter how much one tried to prevent it, the child would come into contact with a mobile phone one day. Therefore, the only thing Xianxia could do now was to set some rules with this little thing and set a time limit for it to play every day. It's okay to play with your phone, but you have to learn self-control first. This was more important than anything else. It was precisely because of this that how to cultivate Nian's self-control became Xianxia's top priority. For this reason, Xianxia didn't even have time to play chess with Gu Lao. Almost every day he would try to find some fun things to do, such as boating, fishing, flying kites, and other outdoor activities. Xianxia only hoped that this could distract the little girl's attention, so that she would not hold the phone all day long. The hearts of all parents in the world. Just like that, the days passed by one. While Xianxia was busy taking care of the child, he did not completely idle. Instead, he took the time to do something bad. And that was, including the Sundial Brilliance Temple, the 5 temples left by the Taiqing Divine Ancestor were all demolished. By searching the memories in Bai Hong's mind, Xianxia found the remaining 4 temples and wantonly destroyed them. The escape route left by the Taiqing Divine Ancestor for the ancient cultivators was blocked by him just like that, and the reason why Xianxia did this was mainly because the Divine Gate was always an uncertain factor. He did not like this feeling very much, as if someone would emerge from the Divine Gate at any time. And last time when the Divine Gate closed, Xianxia had already noticed an extremely powerful aura from it. The unknown represented danger. It was not that Xianxia was afraid, but he did not want his family to face any danger. Not even a little bit. The ancient cultivators had left for too long. After so many years of evolution, the earth had long changed. They were no longer suitable for this era. This was the modern era, not the ancient mythological era. So after thinking for a long time, Xianxia finally made such a selfish decision. He destroyed all the temples that served as coordinates and completely blocked the ancient cultivators' return route, so that they would obediently stay in the great world and not come out to cause trouble from time to time. Whether it was out of selfishness or to protect the Earth's existing environment, this decision was obviously the most correct. To be honest, when he demolished the Sundial Brilliance Temple, it really made Xianxia's heart ache. He destroyed an excellent cultivation place with an 8 times faster time flow just like that. In fact, ever since Bai Hong revealed the information about the 5 temples, Xianxia roughly understood why the time flow in the Sundial Brilliance Temple was different from that of the Earth. It was because the Sundial Brilliance Temple was connected to the Great World, so the time flow in the temple was actually the time flow in the Great World. In addition, Chen Shi guessed that there should be another sundial brilliance temple in the great world. Just like there was a receiver at both ends of the phone, the temple on Earth was just a child temple, and the temple in the great world was the mother temple. Just like the ice and fire island described by Mr. Jin Yong, it was full of spiritual energy and full of vitality. The scenery on the island was even more beautiful, like a fairyland. Such an excellent tourist spot, but so far, few people knew about it. No one had set foot on it all year round. This island was the legendary East Sea Immortal Mountain, Diyu Island. The reason why ordinary people could not find this island was that there was a large array on the island that gathered spiritual energy, defended it, and concealed it. The ancient cultivators had left, but their inheritance was left behind. The village hidden in the depths of Qinling was the place of inheritance, but there was more than one place of inheritance in this world. Diyu Island was one of them. Diyu Island was also a place of inheritance, but there was a big difference between Diyu Island and All Saints Valley. All Saints Valley was run by the clan elders. As long as foreign cultivators passed the test of the clan elders, they could join All Saints Valley and officially become a member of the village. The two words, Fangxin, carved on the stone tablet outside the village were the foundation of the village. Shape does not exist, Fangxin accepts. All rivers run into the sea. All Saints Valley was very inclusive, so whether it was martial artists, necromancers, or other inheritances, everyone could live in harmony in the village and learn from each other in order to break through to the diviner level as soon as possible, or even ascend to the divine gate. Compared to All Saints Valley, Diyu Island was more mysterious and naturally more isolated. It did not accept outsiders and was never open to the outside world, so the residents of the island had always had the same surname. They were of the same clan and had been passed down from generation to generation. Hearing this, the messenger had an extremely awkward expression on his face. After a moment of hesitation, he said cautiously, "Sir, that person also said that he is Mr. Chen's father-in-law, Mr. Chen?" Jiang Yuankue froze for a moment. Then he seemed to think of something, but he wasn't sure. He frowned and asked, "Which Mr. Chen?" "He's the one who soared to immortality with a single sword strike in Taiheng Mountain." Jiang Yuankue was silent. After a long moment of silence, he said solemnly, "Tell him to come see me." "Yes, Patriarch." At the foot of Qixia Peak, Qin Yongyan stood proudly in front of the mountain gate in a plain robe. Although it was called a peak, it was actually only a few dozen meters high. From afar, one could see the cornice of the ancestral shrine at the top of the mountain. Perhaps it was because no stranger had appeared on Diyu Island for a long time, so when Qin Yongyan stood there, countless Jiang family members couldn't help but come to take a look. Qin Yongyan was like an old monk in meditation. After standing there for more than 10 minutes, the Jiang clan member who went to deliver the message hurriedly rushed over. "Mr. Qin, please come with me." Then, the man led Qin Yongyan to the square outside the ancestral shrine. Qin Yongyan had been silent the whole time, but when he arrived at the square, he set his eyes on the giant bronze cauldron. This giant cauldron, All Saints Valley once had one. Qin Yongyan didn't have to wait long in the square before a man in a brown brocade robe strode out. This man looked about the same age as him, probably in his 40s, but his tone was slightly arrogant. As soon as he saw Qin Yongyan, he asked impatiently, "Tell me, why are you here?" Junior Qin Yongyan greets Mr. Jiang. Cultivators naturally couldn't be judged by their appearances. Although Jiang Yuankue's attitude wasn't good, Qin Yongyan still bowed respectfully to him. Jiang Yuankue naturally had the right to be arrogant. After all, his age and seniority were much higher than Qin Yongyan's. However, when Jiang Yuankue approached Qin Yongyan, he suddenly realized Qin Yongyan had actually stepped into the celestial being realm, which surprised Jiang Yuankue quite a bit. A junior with the surname Yong should be between 40 and 60 years old, but he had already stepped into the celestial being realm? This kind of cultivation aptitude was rare even in the Jiang family. No wonder this man dared to climb Qixia Peak alone to ask for a meeting. Jiang Yuankui frowned as he sized up Qin Yongyan. Seeing that he didn't answer, Qin Yongyan cupped his hands and bowed. He said directly, "I know that outsiders are not allowed to set foot on Daiyu Island. The reason why I came so abruptly this time is that I have a question that I would like to ask Mr. Jiang." "Tell me about it." Because the Jiang family's inheritance was relatively complete, since ancient times, many cultivators had wanted to come to the island to seek guidance. Under normal circumstances, if it didn't involve too many secrets, or if he happened to be in a good mood at that time, the Jiang family's patriarch would answer the question, which could be considered as forming a good relationship with the outside world. As a result, the Jiang family's reputation naturally became more and more well-known. "Thank you, Mr. Jiang." Qin Yongyan bowed again, then slowly said, "I have an only daughter who entered the ancestral hall at the age of 8 and became Xian Nu. In the blink of an eye, 20 years have passed, and my daughter has married and has children, living a stable and happy life," Qin Yongyan narrated in a calm tone. But when Jiang Yuankui heard the two words, Xian Nu, he frowned on the spot. This was because he had already guessed what Qin Yongyan wanted to ask. Just as expected, Qin Yongyan said some seemingly long-winded words, but in the end he suddenly changed the topic and said, "My wife is also Xian Nu, so I know very well that most Xian Nu won't live past 40. This kind of tragedy has happened once before, and now it's happening to my daughter again. Let me say something disrespectful to the ancestors. If I could turn back time, even if I had to sacrifice my life, I would never let my daughter become Xian Nu. Unfortunately, it's too late to say anything now." Speaking up to this point, Qin Yongyan raised his head and glanced at Jiang Yuankui. Then, with a solemn expression, he said, "This junior has heard that most of the mystical maidens of the Jiang clan will have good endings. Therefore, I took the liberty to visit. I only hope that Mr. Jiang can dispel this junior's doubts and save my daughter who has finally managed to live a good life." After saying this, Qin Yongyan bowed again, very respectfully to Jiang Yuankui. Jiang Yuankui silently looked at Qin Yongyan. After being silent for a long time, he said in a deep voice, "Get up first." Hearing this, Qin Yongyan's face lit up with joy. Just as he was about to thank him, he heard Jiang Yuankui sigh and say, "I'm very sorry." Chapter 345. The sea breeze blew over the mountains and over the treetops, gently carrying fallen leaves to the square outside the ancestral shrine. After hearing Jiang Yuankui's reply, Qin Yongyan's heart sank. He hurriedly bowed and begged, "I have also heard that the Jiang clan's secret has never been mentioned to outsiders. However, this matter concerns my daughter's life, so I have no choice but to treat it seriously. Mister, you are the leader of a clan. If you have any difficulties, this junior can understand. I only hope that sir can give me some pointers and point out a path for my poor daughter. This junior will definitely remember such a great favor in his heart at all times. Thank you for your trouble, sir." After speaking, Qin Yongyan bowed to Jiang Yuankui again. The meaning of his words was very clear. Even if Jiang Yuankui could not reveal it due to the clan rules, he could still give him some pointers. In any case, he could give him a direction to work towards. Then, he could find a solution in that direction. This request did not seem excessive, but Jiang Yuankui did not know why. After hearing Qin Yongyan's words, he responded with an expressionless face, "I already said that I cannot help you with this matter, please go back." After speaking, Jiang Yuankui flicked his sleeves and turned to walk back to the ancestral shrine. "Sir Jiang, please stay." Qin Yongyan could not help but feel anxious. He could not help but take a few steps forward, wanting to say a few words to Jiang Yuankui. However, at this time, a young man appeared in front of him at an extremely fast speed. Then he stretched out his right hand and stopped Qin Yongyan. The clan leader's meaning is very clear. Please go back. Qin Yongyan glanced at the young man, only to discover that this young man was actually a diviner-level expert. For a moment, he was unable to advance or retreat. Qin Yongyan's face revealed a look of struggle. After hesitating for a moment, he suddenly bent his knees in front of this young man, and with a plop, he knelt on the ground. I hope that Sir Jiang will be merciful and save my poor daughter. A diviner was actually doing such a thing. This made the young man feel a little surprised, so he could not help but look at Jiang Yuankue, wanting to hear his opinion. Jiang Yuankue stopped, but he didn't turn around. It's not that I don't want to help you, but I can't. Her fate was sealed the moment she became the Siming Xian Nu. Isn't it too late for you to regret it now? At this point, Jiang Yuankue suddenly glanced at the young man and said, Feng Yan, help me see the guest out. Yes, Patriarch. The young man called Feng Yan nodded. Then he reached out his right hand and said to Qin Yongyan, Mr. Qin, please go back. Qin Yongyan knelt on the ground and remained silent for a long time. In the end, he gently shook his head and said in a very lonely voice, Forget it. I have disturbed Mr. today.